Hello and welcome to Sleep Midnight. It is said that there are places on this earth where time does not move forward, but circles back upon itself, returning again and again to a single hour, a single threshold that was never meant to be crossed. In the hills where the forest grows thick and wild, where the light falls differently than it does elsewhere, there stands a gate. Not the gate of a castle, nor the entrance to a city, but something older, something that was built when the world still believed in boundaries between what is seen and what is hidden. The monastery that once surrounded it is gone now. Or rather, it remains only as a memory held in stone. The walls are there, yes, crumbling into the earth from which they were raised. But they feel more like echoes than structures, shadows of what was once a sanctuary. Vines have claimed the courtyards. Moss grows thick on the flagstones where monks once walked in contemplative silence, their footsteps wearing paths into rock over centuries of devotion. The wells are dry, the bells hang silent in their towers, their ropes long since rotted away, their voices stilled. But the gate remains. It stands at the edge of the cloister, where the last stones of human intention meet the first wildness of the forest beyond. It is made of iron, blackened with age, its hinges thick as a man's wrist, and it is set within an archway of limestone carved with symbols that no scholar has ever fully translated. Some say they are prayers. Others believe they are warnings. The symbols are worn now, softened by rain and wind and the slow passage of years. But they are still there, still watching, still holding whatever secret the monks entrusted to them when they lifted their chisels, babas, and began to carve. What were they protecting? What did they fear would follow them through? The air here is different. You feel it the moment you step into the ruins. A heaviness, not oppressive, but present. The way memory has weight when it refuses to fade. It is the air of a place where something happened. Something that left an impression deeper than stone. Something that still lingers in the shadows between the trees and the spaces where prayers were once spoken. We move slowly through what remains of the cloister, our footsteps quiet on the broken floor. The monastery was small, built not for grandeur, but for solitude, for the kind of spiritual work that requires separation from the world. There would have been perhaps a dozen monks here, perhaps fewer, living lives measured not in days, but in prayers, in the slow turning of seasons, in the rhythm of bells that called them to worship at hours when the rest of the world slept. Past the wells we walk, stone circles that once drew water from deep within the earth, now filled with leaves and silence. Past the refectory, where wooden tables have long since collapsed into dust. Past the scriptorium, where manuscripts were copied by candlelight, each letter formed with the devotion of a prayer. And past the bell tower, where the iron bells still hang, their mouths open to the sky, waiting for a sound that will never come. There is a stillness here that feels older than silence. It is the stillness of a place that has been deliberately abandoned, not from war or plague or famine, but from something else. A choice, perhaps, or a necessity that could not be spoken aloud. The monks left no record of why they departed. The manuscripts that remain are careful, precise accounts of daily life. The planting of herbs, the mending of robes, the copying of psalms. But there is nothing about the leaving, nothing about what changed, only the gate and the symbols carved around it, and the stories that have grown up in the absence of truth. The monks spoke of a threshold, not between rooms, but between worlds. This is what the fragments tell us. The whispers that have survived in the villages below, passed down through generations of people who never climbed the hill to see the ruins for themselves, but who remembered the stories their grandparents told. The monks believed that certain hours held a different quality, that at dawn and at dusk, when the light is neither day nor night, the boundary between what is and what might be grows thin. They wrote, in margins, in letters tucked into the backs of other books, of prayers that seemed to travel farther at these hours, of chants that echoed in ways that could not be explained by stone and acoustics alone. They wrote of visions, not the visions of saints, bright and terrible and divine, but something quieter, more uncertain, shadows that moved differently, voices that seemed to come from just beyond the edge of hearing, the sense that something was listening, something that lived in the spaces between moments, in the cracks of time where certainty dissolves and the world becomes permeable. At dusk, they would lock the gate. Every evening, as the sun touched the western hills and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the monks would gather in the courtyard. One of them would approach the gate. Always the eldest, some say, or perhaps the one chosen by lot. And with both hands, he would pull it closed. The hinges would groan, the iron protesting its own weight, and the latch would fall into place with a sound like finality. Then they would retreat into the chapel, into the safety of stone walls and candlelight, and they would begin to chant, their voices rising like smoke. What did they see in that liminal space? What made them choose stone over answers? We stand now in that same courtyard, in the hour they feared and honored. The sun is setting. The light is golden and then amber, and then the deep bruised purple that comes just before night claims the sky. The gate stands before us, its iron surface mottled with rust, its hinges stiff but unbroken. It is close, as it has been closed for centuries, but it does not feel like an ending. It feels like waiting. Through the archway, through the symbols that spiral and intersect in patterns that resist meaning, we can see the forest. It has grown closer since the monks left. The trees pressing in against the monastery walls, roots breaking through foundations, branches reaching into windows like searching fingers. The path that once led from the gate into the woods is gone, swallowed by ferns and undergrowth and the slow, patient encroachment of the wild. But the gate opens inward. This is what we notice as the last light touches the iron hinges, as the first stars appear through the broken rafters of the bell tower. The gate is designed to open not outward, into the forest, but inward, into the courtyard, into the monastery itself. As though what the monks feared was not in the woods beyond, but in the threshold itself. As though the danger was not in what might enter, but in the act of opening, in the invitation that swing's hinges make when they turn, in the space that appears between closed and open, between here and there. We linger in that twilight hour, neither fully in day nor surrendered to night, and we understand, or begin to understand, why the monks chose silence over certainty. Some questions are not meant to be answered. Some gates are not meant to be opened. Some thresholds exist only to remind us that there are boundaries we should not cross. Not because we cannot, but because we should not. Because the cost of knowing is greater than the comfort of mystery. The gate remains, rusted but unbroken, and the forest has grown quiet around it. No birds call from the branches. No wind moves through the leaves. Even the insects seem to have gone silent, as though the hour itself demands reverence, as though the world is holding its breath. We are left with the echo of a question no one dared to ask aloud, and the fading outline of a passage that was never meant to close, and perhaps was never truly open. The symbols on the archway catch the last of the light, and for a moment, just a moment, they seem almost legible, as though the angle of the sun or the quality of our attention has shifted something, allowed us to glimpse what the monks saw when they carved these warnings into stone. But then the light fades, and the symbols return to their mystery, and the gate stands as it has always stood, locked, waiting, holding its secret in iron and silence and the gathering dark. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps some truths are kept not because they are precious, but because they are dangerous, and the greatest wisdom is knowing when to turn away, when to let the gate remain closed, when to honor the threshold by never crossing it. The stars are out now. The monastery is a collection of shadows, and the gate that opens only at dusk, remains shut against whatever waits on the other side of twilight. 2. The book, buried beneath the altar. There is a cathedral in the hills where no mass has been said for 300 years. It stands alone, far from any village, accessible only by a path that winds through forests of oak and ash, past springs that run cold even in summer, past stones that mark graves no one remembers. The cathedral is small, as such places go. Not a grand monument to faith, but something quieter, more intimate, built in an age when worship was a whispered thing, when prayer was spoken not to crowds but to silence. The doors are locked, but the lock is old, and the wood has warped with centuries of rain and sun. And if you know where to press, the door will open with a sound like a sigh, as though the building itself has been waiting for someone to return. Inside, the air is different. It is cool, even on the warmest days, and it carries the scent of stone and dust and something else, something faint and sweet and impossible to name. Incense, perhaps, though no incense has been burned here in living memory. Or perhaps it is simply the smell of time itself, of years accumulated in darkness, of prayers that soaked into the walls and never quite faded. The nave is empty, the pews are gone, either rotted away or removed long ago. The floor is flagstone, worn smooth in places where feet once walked, where knees once knelt. Light falls through stained glass windows, reds and blues and golds that have dimmed with age, but still hold their color, still cast their glow across the stone in patterns that shift with the movement of the sun. And at the far end, beneath a rose window that depicts a garden neither Eden nor Gethsemane, stands the altar. It is carved from a single piece of limestone, pale and smooth, and it bears marks that do not appear in any known scripture. A woman holding a mirror, her face turned away, her reflection showing not herself, but something distant, something veiled. A tree with roots that become rivers, flowing not downward into earth, but upward into sky. And a door, standing open in empty space, leading to nothing and everything. Its threshold marked with symbols that spiral inward like a prayer collapsing upon itself. Beneath the silence, beneath the stone, beneath the altar where bread and wine were once consecrated, there is a secret. We descend. The entrance to the crypt is hidden. Not deliberately, but by time, by the way memory fades when no one is left to remember. A stone in the floor, marked only by the faintest outline, lifts, if you know, to press down on its western edge. Beneath it, narrow stairs lead down into darkness, into the cold belly of the hill upon which the cathedral was built. The air here tastes of limestone and forgotten incense, of earth and candle wax, and something older still. The walls are rough, unfinished, the stones showing the marks of chisels, and the seep of groundwater that has traced mineral patterns across the surface, like script, written in a language of time and chemistry. There are no windows here, no light except what we bring with us, and even that seems diminished, as though the darkness here is heavier than ordinary shadow, as though it has substance and weight. The crypt is small, a single chamber, barely larger than the altar above it. There are niches in the walls where bodies might once have been laid to rest, but they are empty now, their occupants removed or never placed. The floor is dirt, packed hard by centuries of stillness. And in the center, directly beneath where the altar stands above, there is a hollow in the earth. It is shallow, no deeper than a man's forearm, and it is lined with cloth. Linen, perhaps, though it is impossible to say for certain, as the fabric crumbles at the slightest touch, dissolves into dust, as though it had been waiting all these years only for contact, only for acknowledgement. The cloth is wrapped around something small, something that has the shape of a book. Who hid it there? And why in a place of worship? Would knowledge be concealed rather than consecrated? The book is small, no larger than 2 hands pressed together in prayer. Its cover is leather, darkened to the color of old blood, and there is no title, no marking to indicate what it contains. The pages are thick, handmade, the kind of parchment that was scraped and stretched and prepared with the devotion of ritual. They are darkened by time, their edges brittle, and the ink upon them has faded to the color of dried blood, to brown and rust and shadow. Scholars have tried to read it. This we know from the notes they left behind, from the letters tucked into the margins of other books, from the journals that speak of visits to this place in centuries past. They came seeking knowledge, seeking understanding, seeking to unlock whatever truth the book might hold. Some claimed it was a record of visions, the diary of a mystic who saw beyond the veil of the ordinary world. Others believed it was a map of the soul's descent, a guide to the underworld that predated Christian notions of heaven and hell. But the language shifts. It refuses translation, as though it were written for eyes not yet born, or perhaps for eyes that no longer exist. The script is familiar in places. Letters that resemble Latin, symbols that echo Greek, characters that might be Hebrew or Aramaic, or something older still, but they do not hold their meaning. They slip away when you try to grasp them, change when you look too closely, rearrange themselves as though the page itself were alive, as though the book were protecting its secrets, not through code, but through transformation. Some believe it was never meant to be read in the ordinary sense, that the act of reading was not the point, that the book was meant to be experienced, to be contemplated, to be sat with in silence until its meaning emerged not through translation, but through revelation. We sit in the half-light of stained glass, listening to the sound of stone settling. The cathedral breathes around us. Not literally, of course. It is stone and wood and glass, inanimate, fixed. But it has the rhythm of breath nonetheless, the slow expansion and contraction that all old buildings possess. The way they shift with temperature and humidity, with the weight of time pressing down upon them. The floor creaks, the walls whisper. The air moves in currents we cannot see, carrying dust and memory and the faint scent of incense that should not be there. What truth was deemed too fragile or too dangerous to speak? The altar above us is a sanctuary and a seal, a place of consecration built over a place of concealment. The figures carved into its surface are not saints or angels, not Christ or Mary, but something older, something that predates the church itself. The woman with the mirror, the tree with roots that become rivers, the door standing open in empty sky. They are symbols, yes, but of what? Of whom? Perhaps the book beneath the altar is the key to understanding them. Or perhaps the book and the altar are part of the same mystery, two halves of a whole that was deliberately separated, hidden in plain sight and buried in darkness, preserved and protected from a world that was not ready to know. The book remains unread, a secret kept by shadows. We hold it in our hands, feel the weight of it, the texture of the leather cover, the fragility of the pages within. We could try to open it, could attempt once more to decipher the script that has refused so many others. But something stops us. Not fear exactly, but a recognition that some knowledge is sacred not because it is holy, but because it is dangerous, that some truths are kept hidden not to protect them, but to protect us from them. Or perhaps we are simply tired. Perhaps the descent into the crypt, the journey through the empty cathedral, the weight of 300 years of silence has settled upon us, and we no longer have the strength or the desire to push further, to demand answers from a book that has no intention of giving them. We return the book to its hollow, wrap it once more in the crumbling cloth, and ascend the narrow stairs back into the light. The cathedral receives us in silence, the stained glass casting its colours across the floor, the altar standing as it has always stood, carved with its mysteries, holding its secrets. We replace the stone that covers the entrance to the crypt, pressing it down until it settles flush with the floor, until the outline disappears and the entrance is once more hidden, once more forgotten, and we leave. The door closes behind us with the same sighing sound. The lock catches, and the cathedral returns to its waiting. The path through the forest seems shorter on the way back. Or perhaps we are simply moving faster, eager to return to a world where books can be read and altars are simply altars, and knowledge is not something to be buried beneath stone. But the question remains. It follows us down the path, through the forest, into the ordinary world where we sleep and wake and go about our lives. Who hid the book and why? What did it contain that required such secrecy, such protection, such deliberate concealment in the one place where truth should have been proclaimed? Perhaps we will never know. Perhaps the book was never meant to be understood by minds like ours, bound as we are by language and logic and the need for answers. Perhaps it was meant for another time, another people, another way of seeing. Or perhaps it is still waiting, there beneath the altar, wrapped in its crumbling cloth, patient and silent and eternal, for eyes that are ready to see, for hands that are ready to open, for a moment when the world is prepared to receive the truth it holds. Until then, the cathedral stands in the hills, empty and sacred, a sanctuary and a seal, and the book remains unread beneath the altar, a mystery preserved in darkness and stone and 300 years of silence. 3. The city that faded with the moonlight. There are ruins in the desert that appear only under certain moons. Not every moon will reveal them. Not the new moon, when darkness claims the sand and the stars burn cold and distant. Not the crescent, thin as a blade, offering only silver suggestions of what might lie beneath the dunes. But when the moon is full and low, hanging heavy on the horizon like a lantern suspended between earth and sky when its light falls thick and golden across the emptiness. Then, sometimes, the city returns. Travelers speak of it in whispers. They describe it carefully, as one describes a dream upon waking, knowing that words will never quite capture what was seen, what was felt. They speak of walls that shimmer at the edge of vision, structures that seem solid until you try to focus on them, at which point they dissolve into tricks of light and shadow. They describe streets paved with glass, or something like glass, something that catches moonlight and holds it, reflecting not the sky above but the stars themselves, as though the ground had become a window into some other heaven. And fountains. Always, they mention the fountains. Fountains that held no water, but reflected stars, their basins empty and yet somehow full, filled with light that moved as water moves, that rippled when the wind passed over it, that seemed to flow from source to basin to channels that led deeper into the city, into places the travelers never quite reached before the moon shifted and the vision faded, and they found themselves standing once more on unmarked sand. Was this a city of the living, or a place built by those who had passed beyond? The question hangs in the desert air, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. There are no records of such a place in any archive, no mention in any chronicle or map or traveler's account from the ages when the desert was crossed by caravans and trade routes, when cities rose and fell and left their marks in pottery shards and foundation stones. This city, if it was a city, left nothing behind. No coins stamped with the face of kings, no inscriptions naming gods or celebrating victories, no bones in the sand to suggest burial, no ash to indicate fire, no broken walls to mark conquest or abandonment. Only absence. And on certain nights, when the moon is full and low, the faint outline of what that absence once contained. We walk through what remains, or what appears to remain, or what the moonlight suggests might have remained, once, in a time that has slipped beyond the reach of history into something older. Something that exists now only in the space between what is and what was, between memory and dream. The sand is soft beneath our feet, and we move slowly, carefully, as though we are walking through something fragile, something that might shatter if we step too heavily, if we breathe too hard, if we allow ourselves to believe too strongly in the solidity of what we see. The moonlight is everywhere, thick and golden and almost liquid, pooling in hollows, draping over dunes, casting shadows that seem too sharp, too defined for natural light. And there, rising from the sand like bones breaking through skin, are the archways. They stand alone, unsupported by walls, leading from nothing to nothing. They are made of stone, pale stone, smooth and unmarked, with no visible seams or mortar, as though each archway had been carved from a single piece of rock. They frame emptiness. They frame sky. They frame the desert beyond, which looks different when seen through them, as though the act of passing beneath an arch would take you not to the other side, but to some other place entirely. Some other version of the desert where the rules are different, where time moves at another pace. We do not pass through them. Some instinct warns us against it. some ancient knowledge written into the body that recognizes thresholds and knows when they should not be crossed. So we walk around them instead, moving deeper into what the moonlight reveals, into the ghost of the city that appears only under certain moons. There are courtyards open to the sky, their floors paved with the same glass-like substance as the streets, their centers marked by the empty basins of fountains. We approach one and look down into its depths, and there, impossibly, are the stars, not reflected from above, but present within the basin itself, as though the fountain had captured a piece of sky and held it even after the water, if there ever was water, had drained away. We reach down to touch the surface, and our hand passes through without resistance. There is nothing there, nothing solid, and yet the stars remain, glowing softly in the basin, unaffected by our presence, indifferent to our doubt. Beyond the courtyard, we find staircases. They rise from the sand at strange angles, climbing toward nothing, their steps worn smooth by their feet that left no other trace. Some spiral upward in graceful curves. Others ascend in straight, steep flights that seem to defy the gentleness of the moonlight, that demand effort and intention from anyone who would climb them. But they end in mid-air, at heights where platforms or floors or rooms must once have been, where people must once have walked and lived and looked out over the city spread below them. Now there is only sky. We stand at the base of one staircase and imagine what it would be like to climb it, to ascend step by step into the air, to stand at the top where there is no top, where there is nothing but the fall back down and the moon above and the desert stretching away in all directions. We imagine what they saw from up there, the ones who built this place. We imagine what they were looking for, what they were trying to reach. But we do not climb. Some say it was a refuge for dreamers. This is the first explanation offered by those who have seen the city, who have stood in its moonlit streets and felt the weight of its absence. They say it was built by those who could no longer bear the ordinary world, by the exiled and the heartbroken and the mad with visions, by those who needed a place where they could vanish from history and live in the margins of the world, in the spaces between what is remembered and what is forgotten. A city for ghosts of the living. A place to disappear without dying, to step sideways out of time and continue existing in some parallel space where the rules were gentler, where the light was always golden, where water could be stars and stairs could lead to sky, and no one would ask you to explain yourself or justify your presence or prove that you belonged. Others believe it was never finished, that its builders began with grand intentions, with plans drawn in sand and visions held in hearts, with the determination to create something that had never been created before. A city of glass and starlight, a place where the boundary between earth and heaven would grow thin, where prayers could rise unimpeded and blessings could descend without obstacle. But something happened. Something called them away before the final stones were set, before the fountains were filled, before the rooms at the tops of the staircases were completed. War, perhaps, plague, famine, or simply the loss of faith, the slow erosion of certainty that comes when a project takes too long, when the vision begins to dim and the ordinary world reasserts its claims and the builders realize they have families to feed and fields to tend and lives that cannot be postponed forever for the sake of a dream. So they left, and the desert, patient and implacable, began to cover what they had started, grain by grain, wind by wind, until nothing remained but the foundations, the bones of the vision, the outline of what might have been. The moonlight pools in the hollows where doors once stood. We stand in one of these hollows, in a doorway that leads nowhere, and for a moment, just a moment, as fleeting as breath, we can almost see them, figures moving through rooms that no longer exist, not clearly, not with the definition of the living, but as suggestions, as possibilities, as shapes that form at the edge of vision and dissolve when we try to look directly at them. They carry lamps that cast no shadows. They walk with purpose, as though the rooms are still there, as though the walls still stand and the ceilings still shelter, and the city is whole and inhabited and real. They pass by us without seeing us, or perhaps we are the ones who do not exist to them. Perhaps we are the ghosts, the intruders from another time, the ones who have stumbled into their world rather than them into ours. We watch them fade, watch the moonlight shift as the earth turns and the moon begins its descent toward the western horizon. The city grows fainter. The archways lose their definition. The glass streets dim. The stars in the fountain basins flicker and go out. By morning, the desert is smooth again. We stand in the pale light of dawn, and there is nothing around us but sand. No archways, no courtyards, no staircases climbing toward empty sky. The city has been reclaimed by absence, returned to whatever space it occupies when the moon is not full and low, when the conditions are not right for its appearance. We are left with the memory of light on glass. And the question, quiet, insistent, impossible to answer, of whether we were remembering or dreaming, whether the city we walked through was ever real in the way we understand reality, or whether it exists in some other register, some other frequency that becomes briefly visible only under certain moons, only when the light falls at a particular angle and the heart is open to seeing what cannot quite be seen. Perhaps it was never meant to be found in the ordinary sense. Perhaps it is a city that exists in the space between certainty and doubt, between waking and sleeping, between what we know and what we long for. A city built not of stone and glass, but of possibility, of the human need to believe that there are places beyond the mapped world, refugees beyond the reach of history, thresholds that lead not to other rooms, but to other ways of being. The moon sets, the sun rises, the desert returns to itself, and somewhere, in the space between what is and what might be, the city waits for the next full moon, for the next traveler who will walk its streets and climb its stairs and stand in its doorways and wonder, as we wonder now, whether any of it was real, or whether reality itself is less solid than we imagine, less fixed, more willing to reveal its mysteries to those who are willing to walk through moonlight and believe, if only for a moment, in cities that fade with the dawn. 4. The map that led into shadow. In the archive of a forgotten library, there is a map drawn on vellum so thin it is nearly translucent. The library itself exists in a city that has survived empires and earthquakes, fires and floods, though few now remember it is there. It occupies the upper floors of a building whose lower levels have been converted to other purposes. Shops and offices and storage rooms. While above, in chambers that smell of old paper and dust, and the particular silence that accumulates in places where knowledge has been abandoned, The archive waits. The map is kept in a wooden case lined with silk that has faded from crimson to the color of dried roses. The case is not locked. There is no need for locks. Few people come here anymore, and those who do are searching for other things. Land deeds, birth records, the mundane documentation of lives that have ended. They do not think to open the case that sits on a high shelf in the corner, unmarked and unremarkable, distinguished only by the fact that no dust has settled upon it, as though even dust knows to keep its distance. When you lift the lid, the vellum inside seems to glow, not with its own light. It is far too old for that, far too fragile. But with the light it catches and holds, the way certain things seem to gather illumination even in dimness. The vellum is so thin you can see your hand through it, see the lines of your palm beneath the lines drawn in ink. And for a moment, the two sets of lines seem to merge, as though the map and your hand were always meant to be read together. It shows no coastlines, no mountains, no cities. There are no familiar landmarks to orient the eye, no rivers or roads or boundaries between kingdoms. Instead, there are only chambers, rooms perhaps, or spaces or states of being, rendered as simple geometric forms, circles and squares and shapes that fall somewhere between. They are connected by passages that do not run straight but spiral, curve back upon themselves, create paths that seem to lead in one direction only to double back and approach the same chamber from another angle entirely. And at the center, where all the spirals lead, where all the passages converge, there is a single word. It is written in a script that looks almost familiar. Letters that echo alphabets we know, but do not quite match any of them. Scholars have tried to read it. Linguists have compared it to every known language, living and dead, to cuneiform and hieroglyphics, to Sanskrit and Aramaic, to the secret scripts of mystery cults and the invented languages of prophets. But the word resists translation, holds its meaning close, as though it were written for eyes that see differently than ours, for minds that process meaning in ways we have forgotten or never knew. Cartographers have studied this map for centuries. We know this from the notes left in the margins of other documents, from letters exchanged between collectors and scholars, from journal entries that speak of sleepless nights spent tracing the spirals, trying to understand what the map depicts. Is it a temple? Some believe so, point to the symmetry of the chambers, the deliberate progression from outer to inner, the way the whole thing feels like a journey towards something sacred, something that demands purification and preparation before it can be approached. Or is it a labyrinth? The spirals suggest this, the way the passages fold back upon themselves, creating a path that is both purposeful and confusing, that leads you deeper even as it seems, to bring you back to where you started. A labyrinth built not to trap but to transform, not to confuse but to initiate, to prepare the traveler for what waits at the center. Or perhaps it is neither temple nor labyrinth, but something else entirely. A diagram of the mind itself, a map of consciousness, a representation of the soul's architecture with its chambers of memory and dream, its passages of thought and feeling, its center where the self resides, naked and unnamed, waiting to be discovered or confronted or escaped. The lines are delicate, almost trembling, as though drawn by a hand that feared to press too hard. This is what you notice when you lean close, when you allow your eyes to follow the spirals from their outermost curves toward the center. The ink is brown, faded with age, but still visible, still clear enough to trace. And the quality of the lines themselves suggests hesitation, uncertainty, as though the cartographer, if that is what they were, drew this map not from direct observation, but from memory, or from vision, or from some combination of the two that exists in the space between waking and dreaming. There are places where the lines waver, where they almost break, where you can see the moment when the hand paused, reconsidered, then continued with renewed determination or deepening doubt. Around the edges, in script so small it requires magnification, are warnings. Do not follow the left path. The third door does not open. Turn back before the center. They are written in the same unknown script as the word at the center, but these phrases have been partially translated, their meanings debated and discussed in the notes left by previous scholars. Some translations render them as warnings, others as instructions, still others as prayers or incantations meant to protect the traveler from dangers that the map itself does not depict. Who wrote them? The same hand that drew the map, or a later hand? Someone who studied the map and added their own wisdom, their own cautions, their own hard-won knowledge about what the spirals contain? There is no way to know. What we do know is that there is no indication of where this place might be. No scale to tell us if the chambers are the size of rooms or buildings or entire cities. No compass to orient the map to the cardinal directions. No reference to any known geography. No note saying 3 days' walk from the river, or in the mountains north of the old capital, or beneath the Temple of the Sun. The map exists in isolation, untethered to the physical world. Some believe it is a spiritual map, a guide for the soul's journey after death. This interpretation has ancient precedent. Many cultures have created such maps. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, with its instructions for navigating the underworld, the Tibetan Bardo Thodol describing the states between death and rebirth, the Greek descriptions of the path to Hades with its rivers and guardians and fields of asphodel. Perhaps this map is another such guide, created by a culture we have lost, preserved in a library we have forgotten, waiting for the dead who will never come to claim it. The chambers could be the states the soul passes through. The spirals could be the journey itself, winding inward toward judgment, or transformation or dissolution. The warning could be the wisdom of those who have gone before, messages sent back to help those who follow. And the word at the center? Perhaps it is the true name of death, or of God, or of the self that remains when everything else has been stripped away. Others think it is a record of a place that existed once and was deliberately erased. Not a spiritual realm, but a physical one. A temple or city or sanctuary that was built with such care, such intention, such secrecy, that when it was finally destroyed, when it was buried or burned or dismantled stone by stone, this map was all that remained. A memory in ink on vellum preserved by accident or design. The only proof that the place ever existed at all. If this is true, then the warnings take on a different meaning. Not spiritual cautions, but practical ones, directions from someone who knew the place, who had walked its passages and understood its dangers. Do not follow the left path, because it leads to a dead end, or a trap, or a chamber better left unopened. The third door does not open, because it was sealed, or locked, or never completed. Turn back before the center, because what waits there is not enlightenment, but danger. not transcendence, but annihilation. But if the place was destroyed, if it was deliberately erased from history, why preserve the map? Why keep the memory alive? Unless the map itself is a kind of defiance, a refusal to let the place be completely forgotten, a whispered insistence that it mattered, that it existed, that its loss was a loss worth grieving. We trace the spirals with our fingers, feeling the texture of ink raised like scars. The vellum is soft beneath our touch, almost warm, as though it has absorbed heat from all the hands that have touched it over the centuries. The ink has a different texture, slightly raised, creating ridges we can feel as our fingertips move along the passages, following them inward, deeper, closer to the center where the unnamed word waits. There is something hypnotic about this motion, about the act of tracing spirals. Our eyes grow heavy, our breathing slows. The room around us seems to recede, and for a moment, there is only the map, only the spirals, only the slow inward journey toward a center we may never reach. What lay at the center that demanded such secrecy? This is the question that haunts everyone who has studied the map, who has traced its passages and read its warnings, and tried to decipher its meaning. What was so precious, or so dangerous, or so sacred that it required this level of protection, this degree of obscurity? Was it knowledge? A truth too profound or too terrible to speak openly, preserved instead in coded form, in a map that shows not where to go, but how to think, how to see, how to understand? Was it a place? A sanctuary where the initiated could go to escape persecution, to practice forbidden rites, to guard something that the outside world would destroy if it knew of its existence? Or was it nothing at all? Was the map itself the point, the journey more important than any destination, the spiraling inward a meditation, a practice, a way of training the mind to release its attachment to answers and embrace the mystery instead? The map offers no answers, only the invitation to become lost, lost in its spirals, lost in its mysteries, lost in the space between what we know and what we long to know, between the certainty we crave and the uncertainty that defines our existence. We fold the map carefully, return it to its case, close the lid with a gentleness that feels like reverence. The library is quiet around us, the kind of quiet that exists only in forgotten places, where time moves differently, where the past presses close against the present, and the boundary between them grows thin. Perhaps the map was never meant to lead anywhere. Perhaps it was meant to remind us that there are journeys that have no destination, questions that have no answers, centers that can never be reached, and that these are not failures but mysteries, not frustrations but invitations to wonder. The vellum lies in its case, glowing faintly in the dim light, holding its secrets close. And somewhere, in a place that may exist only in ink and imagination, the chambers wait in their spirals, the passages wind toward their center, and the unnamed word pulses softly in the darkness, patient and eternal, marking a threshold we may never cross but can never quite forget. 5. The well that reflects no sky. At the edge of a village that no longer has a name, there is a well so deep that no one has ever heard a stone reach the bottom. The village itself is barely there anymore. A scatter of foundation stones half buried in earth, the outline of walls that once divided home from home, the suggestion of a square where people might have gathered on market days, bears, or festival nights. Wildflowers grow where doorways stood. Lizards sun themselves on stones that once supported roofs. The wind moves through the ruins with a sound like breathing, like the village itself is sleeping rather than dead, waiting for some condition to be met before it wakes again. But the well remains. It stands at what was once the edge of the settlement, where the last houses gave way to fields or forest, or whatever landscape surrounded this place in the time when it had a name and people who spoke it. The well is made of stone, grey stone, smooth and cool to the touch. Its surface worn by centuries of hands reaching over the edge to lower buckets, to draw water, to perform the daily ritual of survival that connected the people above to the darkness below. The stones are fitted without mortar, each one shaped to nestle against its neighbors with such precision that not even a blade of grass can grow between them. This speaks of age, of a time when such work was done with care that bordered on reverence, when a well was not merely a convenience, but a sacred thing, a covenant between earth and sky, between thirst and abundance, between human need and the hidden reserves that the world keeps buried in its depths. Its water is dark, even at noon. We approach slowly, our footsteps careful on ground that has grown uneven with time and neglect. The well is circular, perhaps 6 feet across, its opening framed by a low wall of the same smooth stone. There is no roof over it, no wooden frame to support rope and bucket, no evidence that anyone has drawn water here in living memory. Just the open mouth of stone and the darkness that waits below. When we reach the edge and look down, we see nothing at first. No glimmer of water, no reflection of sky, only blackness deep and complete. The kind of darkness that seems to have weight, that seems to pull at the eyes and suggest depths that go far beyond what is reasonable, what is possible for a village well to reach. But as our eyes adjust, as we allow ourselves to look longer, to see deeper, something begins to emerge from that darkness, not our own reflection. This is what those who have looked into the well report, what the stories whisper and the warnings murmur. The water, if it is water and not something else entirely, does not reflect the face that looks into it. Instead, it shows another face, one that feels familiar and strange at the same time on Dadan, one that carries the weight of recognition without the clarity of memory. Some say they see a parent they lost in childhood, features half remembered, a face that dissolves when they try to hold it in focus. Others report seeing a friend they once knew and have since forgotten, someone whose name has slipped away, but whose presence remains like a scar on the mind, a space where a person used to be. Still others see themselves, but younger or older or changed in ways they cannot quite articulate, as though the well shows not what is but what was, or what might have been. The villagers abandoned this place long ago, but the well remains, its stones worn smooth by hands that drew water here for generations. What did they see in those depths that made them leave? There are no records to tell us. No documents survive explaining why a village would be abandoned, why homes would be left to crumble and fields to go fallow and a well to stand unused at the edge of nothing. The surrounding villages, the ones that still exist, that still have names and people and the ordinary rhythms of life, have stories, but they are fragments, pieces of a narrative that has broken apart over time. Some say there was a sickness, that the water turned bad, and those who drank from it fell into a fever from which they never woke. But there are no graves, no bones, no evidence of mass death or hurried burial. Others claim there was a drought, that the well ran dry and the villagers had no choice but to leave in search of water elsewhere. But the well is not dry. The darkness below suggests depth, suggests water, suggests reserves that have not been touched in centuries. And still others whisper that it was the well itself that drove them away, that what they saw in its depths was too much to bear, too heavy to carry, too true or too terrible to live with day after day. The well is ringed with carvings, spirals and eyes and symbols that predate the village itself. We run our fingers over them, feeling the grooves worn smooth by weather and time. The spirals move inward, tightening as they approach a center that is either a point or a void, depending on how you look at them. The eyes are open, unblinking, carved with a simplicity that makes them more unsettling than elaborate detail would have been. And the symbols, geometric patterns and marks that might be letters in an alphabet we have lost, or images of things that have no names, are arranged in a sequence that suggests meaning, suggests intention, suggests that whoever carved them believed they were doing something important, something necessary. Were these protections, warnings, invitations? The carvings predate the village. This much seems certain. The style is different from the stonework of the houses, the technique older, the weathering more advanced. The well was here first, perhaps for centuries, perhaps for longer. And the village grew up around it, drew sustenance from it, built its life upon the foundation of this dark water and whatever mysteries it contained. There is no bucket, no rope, only the open mouth of the stone and the darkness that waits below. We sit at its edge and listen to the wind moving through the ruins, carrying the scent of wild thyme and dust. The sun is warm on our shoulders, but the air that rises from the well is cool, damp, with an earthy smell that suggests depth and moisture, and things that grow in darkness. We close our eyes and let the sounds wash over us. The wind in the grass, the distant call of a bird, the subtle creaking of stones settling as temperature shifts and the earth breathes. Time moves differently here. Not slower exactly, but less urgent, as though the pressure of the present has eased and the past can press through, can make itself felt in the texture of stone and the quality of light and the way the air tastes on the tongue. Some say the well was never meant for water, but for something else. Messages, offerings, memories too heavy to carry. This idea sits in the mind like a stone dropped into dark water, rippling outward, changing the shape of everything it touches. What if the well was not a source of sustenance, but a receptacle for loss? What if the villagers came here not to draw up what they needed, but to cast down what they could no longer hold? Messages for the dead, perhaps, written on scraps of cloth or carved into wooden tablets, lowered into the depths where the boundary between this world and whatever lies beyond might be thinner, more permeable. Offerings to gods or spirits whose names have been forgotten. Sacrifices made not on altars, but in darkness, given to the earth rather than the sky. Memories too painful to keep, too heavy to carry through the ordinary days of living. Grief and guilt and shame and sorrow, all of it whispered into the darkness and released. Let go, surrendered to depths that would never give them back. If this is true, then the well is not a well at all but a kind of grave, a repository for all the things that must be buried if life is to continue. if the weight of the past is not to crush the possibility of the future. Others believe it is a threshold, a place where the boundary between what is and what was grows thin. Not a grave, but a gateway. Not an ending, but a passage. The darkness below is not empty, but full. Full of everything that has ever been dropped or whispered or surrendered into it. Full of all the accumulated losses and longings of generations. And sometimes, when conditions are right, when the light falls at a particular angle, or the wind carries a certain scent, or the person looking down is in a state of openness, or grief or readiness, that fullness rises up, breaks the surface, shows itself in the face of someone forgotten, in the outline of stars that do not match any constellation. We lean forward, just enough to glimpse the surface. The water, if it is water, is black and still, a mirror that reflects nothing we can see from here. No sky, no clouds, no hint of the world above. Only darkness, and within that darkness, something that might be movement, might be light, might be the faint shimmer of stars arranged in patterns we do not recognize. We lean closer. The stars, if they are stars, do not twinkle. They hold steady, burning with a cold light that suggests distance beyond measure, suggests that we are looking not down into water, but through water, through some medium that allows us to see past the immediate, past the local, into depths or distances that should not be visible from the edge of a village well. What are we seeing? Memory or vision? Past or future? The truth of what lies below, or a reflection of what lies within? The well offers no answers, only the invitation to look, to lean, to risk the vertigo that comes from staring too long into depths that have no visible bottom. The well holds its secrets close, and we rise, leaving it to its silence. Our legs are stiff from sitting. Our eyes ache from the strain of looking into darkness. We step back from the edge, from the open mouth of the stone and the mysteries it contains. And we do not look back as we walk away through the ruins, through the scatter of foundation stones and the wildflowers that have claimed what was once home and hearth and the daily round of human life. Behind us, the well waits. It has waited for centuries, patient and silent, its water dark even at noon, its depths unmeasured and perhaps unmeasurable. It will wait for centuries more, holding whatever it holds, water or memory, threshold or grave, truth or illusion, in the cool embrace of stone and shadow. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries. Some depths are meant to stay unplumbed. Some reflections are meant to show us not what we expect, but what we have forgotten, what we have lost, what we have never quite been able to see clearly, but have always known was there, waiting in the darkness, patient as stone, deep as the earth, holding its secrets close until we are ready, if we are ever ready, to receive them. The wind moves through the ruins, carrying the scent of wild thyme and dust, and the well reflects no sky. And the village that has no name sleeps on in its slow dissolution, returning grain by grain to the earth from which it rose, while at its edge the well remains, open and waiting, dark and deep, holding all that has been given to it and offering nothing back but the faint outline of stars that do not match any constellation we know. 6. The shrine of the unspoken name. Deep in a forest where the trees grow so close that daylight never fully penetrates, there is a shrine built around a single stone. The forest itself is old, older than the nations that have risen and fallen in the valleys below, older than the roads that once connected distant cities, older than the memory of those who walk beneath its canopy now. The trees are massive, their trunks wider than houses, their roots sprawling across the ground like the veins of some vast sleeping creature, their branches interweave overhead, creating a ceiling of leaves and bark so dense that even at midday, the light that filters through is dim and green. More suggestion than illumination, more memory of sunlight than sunlight itself. The air here is different. It is cool and damp, carrying the scent of moss and decay and growth all mingled together. The smell of a place where things fall and are consumed and rise again in new forms, where the cycle of life and death moves at its own pace, indifferent to the urgency of the world beyond. Sound travels strangely here. Voices seem to be absorbed by the trees, muffled and softened until they become whispers. Footsteps on the forest floor make almost no noise, cushioned by layers of fallen leaves and the thick carpet of moss that covers everything. It is a place that encourages silence, that demands it even. The path that leads to the shrine is not marked. There are no signs, no cairns, no blazes cut into bark. Those who find it do so by accident or intuition, by following some inner pull they cannot quite explain, some sense that there is something deeper in the forest, something older, something that waits with the patience of stone for those who are meant to find it. We move through the underbrush, careful not to disturb the moss that has grown over the smaller stones. The shrine reveals itself slowly. First, a break in the trees. Not a clearing exactly, but a place where the trunks stand a little farther apart, where the light is slightly less dim. Then, the stones. They emerge from the forest floor like bones breaking through skin, like the earth itself is remembering something it tried to forget. The smaller stones form a circle, perhaps 20 feet across. They are arranged with deliberate precision, each one placed at what feels like a calculated distance from its neighbors, creating a pattern that suggests meaning even as it resists interpretation. Some are taller, standing upright like sentinels. Others lie flat, half buried in moss and leaf litter, marking points on the perimeter like hours on a clock face. But it is the center stone that holds the eye. It sits alone, untouched by the smaller stones, separated from them by a distance that feels purposeful, sacred. The stone is unmarked, smooth as if shaped by water, though there is no water here, no stream or spring that could have worn it to this perfect roundness. It is roughly the size of a man curled in sleep, perhaps 3 feet high and slightly wider. Its surface the color of smoke or shadow, a grey that seems to shift in the uncertain light. There are no offerings here, no candles, no prayers carved into bark. This absence is striking. In other sacred places, even those long abandoned, there are traces of devotion, coins left in cracks, ribbons tied to branches, flowers placed at the base of statues or stones. But here there is nothing. Only the stone and the silence that surrounds it. Only the circle of smaller stones keeping their patient vigil. Only the forest pressing close on all sides, watching and waiting. What god or spirit was honored here? And why has the name been lost? These questions hang in the air, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. The shrine predates any written record, any oral tradition that has survived into the present. The villages that once dotted these hills are gone now, their inhabitants scattered or absorbed into other communities, stories dissolved into the general pool of folk memory, where specific details are lost, and only the emotional residue remains. The sense that something important happened here, that something sacred was once known and has since been forgotten. We feel the weight of something watching, not with eyes, but with memory. It is not an uncomfortable sensation, not threatening or hostile, but it is present, undeniable. The forest is aware of us. Or perhaps it is the shrine itself, the stone and the circle around it, holding in their substance the accumulated attention of everyone who has ever stood here, everyone who has ever wondered and questioned and sought meaning in this arrangement of rocks in the middle of a forest where daylight never fully penetrates. The shrine is older than the forest, older than the villages that once dotted these hills. This seems impossible at first. How can stone be older than trees, when these trees themselves are ancient, when their roots run deep, and their trunks bear the scars of centuries? But when we examine the ground around the circle, we begin to see evidence of something that predates the current growth. The roots of the great trees curve around the stones, avoid them, as though they grew up knowing the circle was there, and should not be disturbed. The soil itself is different inside the circle. Compacted, almost stone-like, as though it has been pressed and repressed by countless feet over countless years until it has lost its softness, its ability to nurture growth. The shrine was here first. The forest grew around it, accommodated it, learned to leave it alone. There are stories, or fragments really, of pilgrims who came here seeking answers and left with none. We know this from the occasional mention in old texts, from footnotes in books about other subjects, from letters that reference the shrine in the deep woods, without elaboration, assuming the reader already knows what is meant. The pilgrims came seeking healing, or wisdom, or visions. They came with questions about love or death or destiny. They came because they had heard whispers that this place held power, that the stone at its center was a door, or a key or an oracle that would speak to those pure enough to hear it. But the stone gave them nothing, or it gave them silence, which is a kind of nothing, or perhaps is everything, depending on how you listen. Some returned changed anyway. Not because they received answers, but because they learned to live without them. Because standing in the circle and receiving nothing taught them something they could not have learned anywhere else. Others never returned at all. Of women who whispered to the stone at midnight and were never seen again. These stories are darker, more troubling. They speak of disappearances, of women who came alone to the shrine under the full moon and were found missing the next morning. Their footprints ending at the edge of the circle. Their belongings left behind in the villages they came from. Search parties found nothing. The forest yielded no clues. The stone sat in its circle, smooth and cold and silent, offering no explanation. Were they taken, transformed? Did they pass through the stone into some other place, some other state of being? Or did they simply walk into the forest after their vigil and lose their way, succumbing to the cold or hunger or the simple disorientation that comes from being alone in a place where daylight never fully penetrates? The stories do not say. They only note the pattern. Women at midnight, whispers to the stone disappearance, and leave the rest to implication and fear. The stone itself is cold to the touch, even in summer. We approach it slowly, reverently, aware that we are crossing a threshold, even if we do not fully understand what that threshold marks. The moss is thick beneath our feet, soft and yielding, and as we step into the circle, the quality of the air changes. It becomes denser somehow, heavier, as though we have moved from one atmospheric pressure to another, as though the space inside the circle exists at a different altitude or depth than the space outside it. We reach out and place our palm against the stone. It is cold. Not merely cool, but genuinely cold. The kind of cold that suggests deep earth or deep water, places where the sun's warmth has never reached. The surface is smooth, almost slick, and there is a faint vibration beneath our hand, so subtle we might be imagining it, a tremor that could be our own pulse reflected back, or could be something else, something deeper, the heartbeat of the earth itself, or the residual energy of all the prayers and questions and desperate hopes that have been directed at this stone over the millennia. There is a faint hum in the air, as though the earth beneath it is hollow. We step back and listen. The hum is real, not imagination. It is low and constant, felt more than heard, vibrating in the chest and the bones of the skull. It does not change pitch or volume. It simply is, constant and eternal, a fundamental tone that might have been humming here since before the first humans found this place and recognized it as sacred. What creates the hum? An underground chamber? A natural resonance in the stone? The accumulated vibration of centuries of wind moving through the forest and finding, in this one spot, a frequency that persists? Or is it something else entirely? The sound of the boundary between worlds wearing thin, the music of a threshold that exists in the space between what is and what might be. We stand in the circle and listen to the forest breathe, to the slow creak of branches and the distant call of birds. Time passes, though we cannot say how much. Minutes or hours, it is impossible to tell. The light does not change. It is always dim, always green, always filtered through layers of leaves that move so slowly we cannot see their motion. The temperature does not shift. The hum continues, patient and eternal. We find ourselves settling into the rhythm of this place, into its slowness, its silence, its refusal to offer easy answers or dramatic revelations. The shrine does not perform for us. It does not manifest visions, or speak in voices, or show us the face of the God whose name has been lost. It simply is, present, patient, holding its truth close the way stone holds heat, the way earth holds water, deep and hidden, and absolutely real. The shrine offers no revelation, only the presence of something sacred and unnamed. And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the shrine exists not to answer questions, but to hold them. To create a space where uncertainty is allowed, where not knowing is honored rather than feared, where the absence of a name does not diminish the reality of the sacred, but intensifies it, makes it more rather than less. A truth kept in stone and silence. We leave the circle as quietly as we entered it, stepping back over the threshold, marked by the smaller stones, feeling the air lighten as we move back into the ordinary forest. Behind us, as the shrine remains, the smooth stone at its center cold and patient, the circle of smaller stones holding their formation, the forest pressing close on all sides. The name has been lost, if there ever was a name. The god or spirit honored here has faded from memory, if it was ever fully known. But the shrine endures, older than the forest, older than forgetting. A presence without identity, a sacred space built around absence, around the recognition that some truths are too deep for language, too vast for naming, too essential to be reduced to syllables and sounds. And in the perpetual twilight of the forest, where daylight never fully penetrates, the stone hums its low and constant song, waiting for the next pilgrim who will come seeking answers and leave with silence, for the next woman who will whisper at midnight, for the next moment when the boundary grows thin and someone standing in the circle will feel, for just an instant, the presence of something that has no name but is absolutely, undeniably there. 7. The hour when bells rang backward. In a tower on the coast, there is a bell that has not been rung in 200 years. The tower stands alone on a promontory of black rock that juts into the sea like a finger pointing towards some distant, unseen shore. It is built of the same dark stone as the headland upon which it rests. Its walls thick enough to withstand the storms that rage up from the south in winter. Its height sufficient to cast a light, when there was a light, that could be seen for miles across the water. But there has been no light in 200 years. The lantern room at the top is empty, its glass panels long since shattered by wind and salt spray, its lamp removed or stolen or simply dissolved into rust and memory. What remains is the tower itself, hollow and dark, and the bell that hangs in the chamber just below where the light once burned. The rope is gone, rotted away or cut, leaving only a frayed stub that dangles uselessly from the bell's crown. The clapper, the heart of the thin bell, the iron tongue that should strike against bronze to create sound, is rusted into stillness, fused to the bell's interior by centuries of moisture and oxidation. By all logic, by all understanding of how bells work and how sound is made, this bell should be silent. And yet, on certain nights when the fog rolls in thick and the moon is hidden, the bell rings on its own, not forward, but backward. This is what the fishermen say, what the villagers whisper, what anyone who has heard it will tell you if you ask, though most prefer not to speak of it at all. The bell does not ring in the normal way, with each toll following the one before in the steady march of time and sequence. Instead, it rings backward. Each toll undoes the one before, as though time itself were being unwound, as though the night were being pulled back into the day into the dawn into the darkness that came before creation. The sound is wrong. This is the first thing people notice. It does not fade in the way normal bells fade, with the vibration slowly diminishing until silence returns. Instead, the sound grows quieter first, then louder, then disappears entirely, as though it had never been, leaving behind not silence but a kind of absence, a hole in the air where the sound should have decayed naturally, but instead was simply erased. Fishermen avoid the tower. Their boats give the headland a wide berth, even when the direct route would save them fuel and time, even when the seas are calm and the risk of running aground is minimal. They claim the sound brings misfortune, not immediately, not in the dramatic way of curses in old stories, but slowly, gradually, through a series of small failures and missed opportunities and dreams that leave them exhausted and afraid. Those who hear the bell dream of drowning even on dry land. They wake in their beds gasping, their lungs burning as though filled with seawater. their limbs heavy with the weight of ocean pulling them down. They dream of cold and darkness and the terrible pressure of depth, of light receding above them while they sink into places where no light has ever reached. And always, beneath the dream, they hear the bell. Not loud, not insistent, but present, constant, tolling backward through the dark water, counting down to something they cannot see, but know is waiting. What happened here that would cause time to reverse? The tower was built as a lighthouse, a guide for ships navigating the treacherous rocks that surround the headland. The coast here is unforgiving. Sharp reefs hidden just beneath the surface, currents that shift with the tide, fog that rolls in without warning and transforms familiar waters into a maze of grey uncertainty. Ships wrecked here regularly before the tower was built, their hulls broken open on stone, their crews drowned in the cold Atlantic waters. The tower was meant to prevent this. The keeper was meant to keep the light burning, to ring the bell when fog made the light invisible, to maintain the rhythm of safety that would guide sailors past the danger and into the harbour beyond. But the tower was abandoned suddenly. Its keeper vanished without trace. The records are sparse, fragmentary. One day there was a keeper, a man whose name appears in the Lighthouse Commission's ledgers, who drew his modest salary and submitted his required reports. The next day, there was no one. The light went dark. The bell fell silent. And when the commission sent someone to investigate, they found the tower empty, the keeper gone, and no explanation for his disappearance. No body, no note. No signs of struggle or violence, just absence, complete and inexplicable. Inside, the walls are covered with marks. Tallies, perhaps, or some other form of counting, scratched into stone with a blade or nail. We climb the narrow stairs, our footsteps echoing in the spiral, and the marks become visible as our eyes adjust to the dim light that filters through the shattered windows. They cover every surface. The walls, the steps themselves, even the ceiling in places where someone would have had to stand on something to reach. They are made with different tools, different pressures. Some are deep gouges that must have required significant force and time. Others are shallow scratches, hasty and irregular, as though made in fear or urgency. They do not form words. They do not create pictures or diagrams. They are simply marks. Vertical lines in groups of 5. The universal symbol for counting, for keeping track, for recording the passage of something that needed to be recorded. But what was being counted? Days? Nights? The number of times the bell rang? The number of ships that passed? The number of times the keeper woke from dreams of drowning? There are no records of what was being counted. No logbooks. No letters. The keeper's personal effects were gone, removed either by him when he left or by someone who came after. The Lighthouse Commission's archives contain nothing useful. Only the bare facts of employment and abandonment, the dates when salary was last paid and when the tower was officially decommissioned. If the keeper wrote letters to family or friends, they have not survived. If he kept a diary, it has been lost. Only the marks remain, and the bell, and the stories of the sound it makes when no hand touches it. We emerge into the bell chamber where the air is salt and rust. The space is circular, open on all sides to the elements, with arched openings that once held shutters or screens, but are now empty, allowing the wind and rain and salt spray to enter freely. The floor is gritty with sand and bird droppings and the accumulated debris of 200 years of neglect. The ceiling is low, designed to accommodate the bell and little else. And there, hanging from a massive iron frame bolted into the stone, is the bell itself. It is larger than we expected. Perhaps 5 feet tall, its diameter almost as wide. Its bronze surface darkened to the color of old pennies or dried blood. The metal is pitted with corrosion, streaked with verdigris in places where water has run down and pooled. The clapper hangs motionless inside, visible through the opening at the bell's mouth, a dark mass of rust-fused iron that looks more like a growth than a mechanism. The bell hangs silent now. The wind moves through the chamber, creating its own sounds. Whistles and sighs, and the occasional sharp crack of something loose striking something solid. But the bell makes no sound. It does not move, does not sway, does not respond to the wind that should, by all logic, set it ringing. We stand beneath it and look up into its dark interior, and we can almost hear it. Not with our ears exactly, but with some other sense, some faculty that exists between hearing and memory and imagination. We can almost hear the deep, mournful tone that it would make if it was struck, the sound that would roll out across the water and the rocks, warning ships, marking time, declaring its presence to the empty coast. But more than that, we can almost hear what the fishermen describe. The backward toll, the sound that unmakes itself, the vibration that moves through time in the wrong direction, pulling the present back toward the past back towards some moment before the tower was built, before the keeper came, before the first ship broke apart on these rocks and someone decided that a light was needed here. The deep, mournful tone that moves backward through the night, calling something home. What is it calling? What is trying to return? We think of the keeper, vanished without trace, and wonder if he heard the bell ring backward that first time. We think of the marks on the walls. Thousands of them, tens of thousands perhaps, scratched with increasing desperation or obsession or simple mechanical repetition. We think of the dreams the fishermen have, the sensation of drowning on dry land, the weight of water that was never there, the darkness that closes over them like a lid. And we begin to understand, or we begin to glimpse the shape of understanding, which is not the same as understanding itself. That the bell is not calling something from elsewhere. It is calling something from another time, pulling it backward through the hours and days and years, dragging it from the past into the present or from the present into the past, collapsing the distance between was and is until they occupy the same moment, the same breath, the same impossible space. Perhaps the keeper counted because he could feel it happening, because he could sense time beginning to fold back on itself, could feel the days repeating or undoing themselves, could no longer trust that tomorrow would follow today in the way it always had. Perhaps the marks were his attempt to anchor himself, to create a record that would persist even if everything else began to move backward, to slip away, to return to the state it was in before he arrived, before the tower was built, before the first bell was cast and hung and rung to guide the ships to safety. Or perhaps he was counting something else entirely. The number of times the bell rang backward. The number of nights when time reversed itself. The number of moments when he stood in this chamber and felt the world around him trying to unmake itself, to return to an earlier state, to erase the present and restore the past. We will never know. The tower keeps its secrets, as the bell keeps its silence, as the rocks keep the bones of ships that foundered here, as the sea keeps everything it takes and gives back nothing but worn fragments and salt-bleached memories. The fog is rolling in now, thick and grey, obscuring the water, climbing the rocks, reaching for the tower with tendrils that move like living things. The moon is hidden somewhere above the cloud layer, and the light is failing, and the hour is approaching when the fishermen say the bell rings. If it will ring tonight, if the conditions are right, if whatever force or intention or accumulated grief that causes it to sound is present and active, we could stay. We could wait in the bell chamber and see if the stories are true, if the bell will ring on its own, if time will reverse itself, and we will hear the backward toll, the sound that unmakes sound, the vibration that pulls the present into the past. But we do not stay. Some truths are too heavy to witness, some mysteries too deep to solve, some sounds too dangerous to hear. We descend the narrow stairs, our footsteps echoing differently now, as though the spiral itself has changed, as though the toe is preparing for something we should not see. Outside, the fog has claimed the headland, and the tower disappears behind us, swallowed by grey and salt and the gathering night. And somewhere above, in the bell chamber we have left empty, the bell hangs in its frame, silent and patient, waiting for the hour when it will ring backward through the darkness, calling something home. Calling the drowned ships, the lost keeper, the days that were counted and can never be recovered, calling them all back through time toward a moment that may have never ended, that may still be happening somewhere in the layers of the past, preserved in bronze and stone and the backward motion of sound through fog and darkness and the cold Atlantic wind. Perhaps it was never meant to stop. Perhaps the bell ring still has always been ringing, will always ring in that chamber where time moves differently, where the past refuses to stay past, where every toll is both an ending and a beginning, both a warning and a summons, both the sound and the absence of sound, echoing backward through the night toward a silence that will never come. 8. The garden where nothing dies. There is a walled garden in the mountains where the plants refuse to wither. The mountains themselves are harsh, unforgiving. Peaks of grey stone that rise sharp against the sky, their slopes scoured by winds that carry ice even in summer, their valleys narrow and shadowed, holding snow well into spring. It is not a place where things grow easily. The soil is thin, rocky, acidic from the pine trees that managed to cling to the mountainsides. The growing season is brief, measured in weeks rather than months, and even then, only the hardiest plants survive. Sedges and saxifrage, dwarf willows that never grow taller than a man's knee. But the garden defies all of this. Roses bloom in winter, their petals unfurling even as snow falls around them. Red and white and yellow against the white drifts, impossibly vivid, impossibly alive. Fruit hangs heavy on branches year-round. Apples and pears and plums that never fall, never rot, never lose their perfect ripeness. The grass remains green beneath snow, visible through the white covering like something glowing from within, as though it draws its color not from sunlight, but from some other source. Some reservoir of life that does not depend on seasons or warmth, or the ordinary rules that govern growth and decay. No gardener tends it. This is perhaps the strangest thing of all. Gardens require care. Weeding and pruning, watering and fertilizing, the constant vigilance against pests and disease, and the natural tendency of cultivated spaces to revert to wilderness. But this garden receives no such attention. No one lives here. No one comes here, except occasionally when curiosity or pilgrimage or some other compulsion draws travelers up the narrow mountain path to the gate. And yet the garden is immaculate. The paths are clear of weeds. The beds are perfectly edged. The trees are shaped as though by expert hands, their branches trained along trellises in patterns that speak of intention and design. Everything is in its place, exactly where it should be, as though the garden itself knows what it is supposed to be and maintains that form through will alone, through some quality inherent in the soil or the walls or the air within them. No rain falls within its walls, yet everything grows with a persistence that feels unnatural, almost defiant. Travelers who have stood outside the garden during storms report that the rain stops at the walls, as though encountering an invisible barrier, as though the garden exists in its own weather system, its own microclimate that follows different laws than the world beyond. Snow accumulates on the walls but does not fall within them. Wind moves through the mountains but grows still when it reaches the garden's boundaries. And yet the plants are not dry. Their leaves are supple, their stems firm, their roots, if you could see them, presumably well watered. The garden provides for itself in ways that cannot be explained, that resist investigation, that simply are, without mechanism or source. The garden was planted centuries ago by a woman whose name has been erased from all records. This we know, or think we know, from the fragments that survive. References in old chronicles to the woman of the mountain. Mentions in letters of she who planted impossibilities. Allusions in poetry to someone who built a paradise and locked herself inside. But her name is never given. Either it was removed deliberately, scratched out of manuscripts and chiseled off monuments, or it was never written down in the first place, kept secret even while her work was acknowledged. Some say she was a queen, driven from her throne by war or treachery, who came to the mountains to build a refuge where power could not touch her, where time could not erode what she had made. Others claim she was a witch, skilled in the old magics that worked with plant and earth, and the hidden forces that make things grow, who created the garden as a demonstration of her art, a permanent installation that would outlast her life and prove the reality of her power. Still others believe she was a saint, a holy woman who sought solitude and found it here, who prayed the garden into existence, whose faith was so pure and so strong that it transformed the barren mountainside into this impossible Eden, and whose prayers continued to sustain it even after her death. We will never know which story is true. Perhaps all of them are true in some way. Perhaps none of them are. The walls are high, stone stacked without mortar, and there is only one entrance. A gate of iron so heavy it takes 2 men to move. The walls rise perhaps 15 feet, constructed of the same grey stone as the mountains around them, fitted together with such precision that no gap exists between the blocks, no space for water or root or time to work its way through. They form a perfect square, or nearly perfect. The corners align to the cardinal directions with an accuracy that suggests astronomical knowledge. Suggests that the garden was not placed here randomly, but according to some plan, some geometric or cosmic significance. The gate is set into the eastern wall facing the sunrise. It is made of iron, black and massive. its surface worked with designs that have been worn smooth by weather and touch. Spirals and vines and shapes that might be letters in some unknown script, or might be purely decorative. The hinges are equally massive, driven deep into the stone. And the gate hangs perfectly balanced despite its weight, so that once you overcome the initial resistance, it swings open smoothly, silently, as though the mechanism had been oiled yesterday rather than centuries ago. Inside, the air is different. We feel it immediately upon crossing the threshold, stepping from the cold mountain air into the space contained by the walls. It is warmer here. Not hot, but temperate, pleasant. The temperature of a perfect spring day. The air is thicker somehow, denser, as though it contains more oxygen or moisture or some other substance that makes breathing easier, makes the lungs expand more fully. And the scent is overwhelming. Not in an unpleasant way, but in its complexity, its richness. It is the smell of flowers, dozens of varieties all blooming at once, their fragrances mingling and layering over one another. Rose and jasmine and lavender, honeysuckle and lilac, and something citrus sharp that might be orange blossom. And beneath it all, the earthy smell of growing things, of leaves and stems and roots, drawing sustenance from soil, of life expressing itself in green and fragrant abundance. But these blooms have no season. Roses that should flower in June are blooming alongside chrysanthemums that belong to autumn, next to tulips that emerge in spring, beside hibiscus that requires summer heat. The garden has collapsed time, or exists outside it, presenting all seasons simultaneously, denying the progression of bloom and fade that defines the natural world. We walk the paths between raised beds and espalier trees, and notice that there are no insects, no birds, no sound of life beyond the growth itself. This absence is profound. In any normal garden, there would be bees moving from flower to flower, butterflies testing the air with their antennae, beetles crawling beneath leaves. There would be birdsong, sparrows and finches, and perhaps a robin, all attracted by the abundance of food and shelter. There would be the buzz and hum and chirp of 1,000 small lives intersecting, competing, cooperating in the complex ecology of cultivation. But here there is nothing. No movement in the air except what the plants make when they shift almost imperceptibly in a breeze that seems to originate from nowhere. No sound except our own footsteps on the gravel paths, our own breathing, and sometimes, if we stand very still, a faint rustling that might be leaves growing, might be roots extending through soil, might be the sound of perpetual life maintaining itself in the absence of death. The silence is complete, reverent, as though the garden is holding its breath, or as though it is a held breath, a moment extended indefinitely, a pause that has become permanent. There is a quality to the silence that feels intentional, deliberate, and as though sound itself has been excluded along with decay and season and the passage of time. We find ourselves whispering, though there is no one to disturb. We find ourselves moving carefully, respectfully, as though we are in a temple or a tomb, some space where the ordinary rules of behavior do not apply, where reverence is the only appropriate response. At the center is a pool, still and dark, reflecting nothing. The paths lead inward in a spiral, winding between the beds and trees, drawing us deeper into the garden's heart. And at the center, in a circular clearing paved with white stone, is the pool. It is perhaps 10 feet across, perfectly round, its edges defined by a low rim of the same white stone as the paving. The water, if it is water, is black, utterly black, without even the faint shimmer that still water usually shows. We approach it cautiously and look down into its surface. It reflects nothing, not the sky above, though there is sky visible through the open top of the garden, not our faces as we lean over it, not the plants that surround it. The surface is like obsidian, like polished jet, like a hole cut into the world that leads to someplace else, someplace where light does not penetrate, where reflection is impossible. We want to touch it, to disturb the surface and see what happens. But something stops us. Some instinct warns that the pool is not what it appears, that it is not simply water but something else. A boundary, perhaps, a threshold, the source or the sink of whatever force maintains the garden in its impossible state. Some believe the woman made a bargain, traded something precious for permanence. This is the first explanation offered for the garden's existence, for its defiance of natural law, that the woman, queen or witch or saint, made a deal with something, gave up something she valued in exchange for this, a place where beauty would never fade, where growth would never cease, where the things she planted would persist forever. What did she trade? Her name, perhaps, erased from records as part of the price, forgotten as a condition of the bargain. Her freedom, possibly. Bound to the garden, unable to leave, maintaining it through her presence even after her death. Her soul, some whisper, surrendered to whatever power could grant such permanence, damned in exchange for earthly immortality. The pool would be the site of the bargain, the place where the exchange was made, where something precious was dropped into the dark water and something impossible rose in return. Others think the garden itself is a trap, a place designed to hold something in stasis forever, not a refuge but a prison, not a paradise but a cage. The woman did not create the garden to preserve beauty, but to contain something, a force, an entity, a truth, that needed to be kept from the world, that could not be destroyed but could be held, frozen in a moment that never ends, sealed within walls where time does not move and decay cannot work its transformative power. If this is true, then the garden's perfection is not a gift, but a restraint, not abundance, but confinement. The plants bloom eternally, not because they are blessed, but because they cannot stop, cannot complete their cycle, cannot produce seed and die and make room for the next generation. They are locked in perpetual flowering, caught in the most beautiful moment of their existence and unable to move beyond it. And the pool at the center would be not the source of the power, but its focus, the point where the trap is anchored, where whatever is being held is most purely itself, most completely contained. We reach out to touch a rose, its petals soft and cold. The petals yield beneath our fingers, delicate and perfect, but they are cold. Not the warmth of living tissue, but the chill of preservation, of something kept at a temperature that prevents decay, but does not sustain life in the ordinary sense. The rose is beautiful, flawless, and utterly without the imperfections that make living things real. No browning at the edges, no blemishes from insects, no irregularity in the curve of the petals. It is more idea than flower, more symbol than substance. We feel the weight of time suspended, beauty preserved in a stillness that may be peace or may be punishment. and we cannot say which it is, cannot determine whether the garden is a blessing or a curse, whether its creator found what she was seeking or created her own prison, whether the permanence she achieved is the highest expression of human will or its greatest tragedy. Perhaps both, perhaps neither. Perhaps the categories of blessing and curse, peace and punishment do not apply here, in this place where the normal rules have been suspended, where time has stopped or slowed or circles back on itself endlessly. The gate swings shut behind us with a sound like finality, and the garden returns to its silence, its perpetual bloom, its patient waiting. The roses continue their impossible flowering. The fruit hangs heavy on branches that will never drop it. The grass remains green beneath the snow that does not fall. And at the center, the pool holds its darkness close, reflecting nothing, revealing nothing, keeping whatever secret it was made to keep in the depths that no light can penetrate, in the stillness that may be peace or may be punishment, in the silence that has lasted centuries and will last centuries more, until the mountains themselves crumble and the walls fall and the garden is finally released from the bargain that holds it suspended between life and death, between time and eternity, between beauty and the price that beauty sometimes demands. 9. The door at the end of memory. In the ruins of an abbey, there is a door that leads to nowhere. The abbey itself sits in a valley that the world has mostly forgotten, a place where the hills fold in upon themselves and the river runs quiet and slow, as though reluctant to disturb the silence that has settled here like sediment. The buildings are in varying states of collapse, walls standing to half their original height, roofs open to the sky, floors covered in the accumulated debris of centuries, fallen stones and rotted timbers, and the fine dust that is all that remains of the things that were once books, tapestries, the daily implements of monastic life. But the chapel, or what remains of it, still holds a measure of its original form. The walls are intact, though the roof is gone, leaving the space open to weather and stars. The floor is flagstone, cracked and heaved by roots that have worked their way beneath it, but still present, still defining the space as something other than mere ground. And at the eastern end, where the altar once stood, where the first light of morning would have illuminated the cross and the candles and the faces of monks at prayer, there is a door. It stands alone in what was once the wall separating the chapel from the sacristy, though the wall is gone now, collapsed into rubble that has been cleared away or absorbed into the earth. The door remains, inexplicably. Frame intact. Hinges solid, the wood dark with age but unrotted, unmarred by the weather that should have destroyed it long ago. When you open it, there is only wall, not empty space, not the ruins of the sacristy beyond. Just wall, smooth, featureless stone that shows no sign of ever having been anything else. No mortar lines, no tool marks, no evidence that a doorway was blocked or bricked over or filled in. Simply stone, solid and seamless, as though it had always been there. As though the door opens onto a surface that has never known passage or opening or the possibility of beyond. And yet the door is real. The latch works, releasing with a soft click when you lift it. The hinges turn without sound, without resistance, as though they had been oiled yesterday. The wood is solid beneath your hand, cool and smooth, carved with letters that run along the lintel in a script that scholars argue over. For those who have forgotten, some translations offer. Or perhaps for those who would forget. The language is old, possibly pre-Latin, possibly a dialect that died with the last speakers centuries before the abbey was even built. The letters themselves are clear enough, carved deep into the wood, but their meaning shifts depending on how you pass the grammar, which words you emphasize, what assumptions you make about the purpose of the inscription. Is it an invitation, an instruction, a warning? What lay beyond it once? And why was it sealed so completely? The abbey was known for its archives, for monks who catalogued the memories of the dying. This much we know from the few documents that survive, from references in other monasteries' records, from the occasional mention in letters or chronicles that speak of the Valley Abbey and its unusual practice. The monks here did not copy scripture or preserve classical texts or maintain genealogies of noble families. Instead, they devoted themselves to something stranger, more ephemeral, more profoundly human. They recorded memories when someone was dying. In the villages nearby, in the manor houses scattered through the hills. Word would be sent to the abbey, and a monk would come. He would sit by the bedside, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, and he would listen. He would listen to the stories the dying told, to the confessions they needed to make, to the visions they saw as the boundary between life and death grew thin and permeable. And he would write it all down, not in the dying person's words exactly, but in a kind of distillation, a poetic rendering that captured the essence of what was said, while transforming it into something that could be preserved, that could be read and understood by others, that could become part of the great archive of human experience that the monks believed was their sacred duty to maintain. They believed memory was sacred, that every life held truths too important to lose. This was their theology, their particular understanding of the divine imperative. God had created each person as unique, unrepeatable, and therefore each person's experience of the world was unique and unrepeatable as well. To let those experiences vanish with death was to allow a piece of God's creation to be lost forever, to permit an impoverishment of the cosmos that was both tragedy and blasphemy. So they wrote, they catalogued, they preserved. The archives grew over generations, filling rooms and then buildings, scrolls and codices stacked on shelves that reached from floor to ceiling, each one containing the distilled memories of a life, the final thoughts and visions and confessions of someone who had passed from this world into whatever lies beyond. But something changed. We do not know what. The records are silent on this point. Or perhaps the records themselves were destroyed as part of whatever upheaval occurred. What we know is that at some point, the dating is uncertain, but probably in the late 14th or early 15th century, the monks stopped writing. They stopped going out to the dying. They stopped accepting the memories that were offered. And then they began to burn. The fires lasted for days. Witnesses in nearby villages reported. Smoke rose from the abbey in thick black columns, carrying with it the smell of burning parchment and ink, of centuries of carefully preserved memory transforming into ash and vapor. The monks worked methodically, feeding scroll after scroll into the flames, showing no emotion, speaking to no one, continuing their work from dawn to dusk, and then through the night by torchlight. Most of what they had recorded was lost in those fires. Only a few documents survived. scraps that were overlooked, pages that had been removed from the abbey before the burning began, fragments that somehow escaped the systematic destruction. And then the monks left. They did not disperse gradually or transfer to other monasteries or die out over time. They simply left all at once, abandoning the abbey to silence and weather and the slow reclamation of nature. Some say they walked into the forest and were never seen again. Others claim they traveled to the coast and took ship for some distant land. A few stories suggest they sealed themselves in the catacombs beneath the abbey and died there, though no bodies have ever been found. The door was the last thing sealed. This we know from the one account that survives. A letter written by a village priest who climbed to the abbey the day after the monks left, curious about the silence, worried that something terrible had happened. He found the place empty, the fires cold, the archives reduced to ash. And he found the door in the chapel, still open at that time, with 2 monks standing before it, the last of their order, completing some final ritual or task. He watched them seal it, watched them place their hands against the stone that appeared in the doorway where passage should have been, watched them step back, test the latch, verify that the door would still open and close, even though it no longer led anywhere. And then they left, walking past him without a word, without acknowledgement, their faces empty of expression, their eyes fixed on something distant. The priest tried to follow them, but they moved faster than seemed possible. And by the time he reached the edge of the forest, they were gone. We stand before it now, running our fingers over the grain of the wood. The door is oak, dark and dense, its surface marked by the growth rings of a tree that must have been ancient when it was felled. The carving is shallow but precise. The letters formed with care and certainty by someone who knew exactly what they wanted to say, even if we cannot fully understand what that was. For those who have forgotten, or perhaps for those who would forget, we wonder what was deemed too dangerous to remember. What truth or vision or confession was recorded in the archives that caused the monks to reverse their sacred mission, to destroy what they had spent centuries building, to seal the passage between what is and what was with stone that shows no sign of ever having been anything but solid, impermeable, final. There are marks on the stone behind the door, faint impressions as though something had once been written there and carefully erased. We can see them if we look closely, if we let our eyes adjust to the dim light and allow the surface of the stone to reveal its secrets. They are not letters exactly, or if they are, they belong to no alphabet we recognize. They are more like symbols, or diagrams, or the kind of marks you might make if you were trying to map something that has no physical location, something that exists in memory or dream or the space between thoughts. The impressions are shallow, barely there. And the stone around them has been polished smooth, as though someone spent hours rubbing the surface, erasing what had been inscribed, removing every trace of whatever knowledge or warning or invitation had been placed there. But the erasure is not complete. It can never be complete. Stone holds memory in ways that transcend the surface, in ways that persist even after the visible marks have been removed. And if we stand here long enough, if we allow ourselves to be still and open and receptive, we begin to feel what was written. Not with our eyes, but with something deeper, something that responds to absence as much as presence. The abbey is silent now, empty of all but light and dust. The wind moves through the roofless chapel, carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers, of the forest that presses close on all sides. Birds nest in the niches where statues once stood. Small animals make their homes in the spaces between fallen stones. The river runs quiet in the valley below, and the hills hold their secrets close. And the sky turns slowly overhead, marking the passage of hours and days and years with the indifference of the cosmos to human concerns. And the door remains, an invitation, a warning, a threshold to nothing and everything at once. We could try to dismantle it, to remove the frame and take the wood away, to study it in some laboratory, where instruments might reveal what our eyes cannot see, where analysis might succeed where intuition fails. But we do not. Some things are meant to remain in the places they were made, serving the purposes for which they were created, even when those purposes are no longer clear. The door is a memorial, perhaps, a monument to the memories that were lost, to the lives that were catalogued and then burned, to the truths that were deemed too dangerous to preserve. Or it is a seal, a permanent closure of the passage between the world of the living and whatever the monks discovered in the memories of the dying. Whatever knowledge or vision or horror they found in the archives that made them reverse their sacred mission and destroy their life's work. Or perhaps it is both. Perhaps it stands as both memorial and seal, both remembrance and forgetting, both an acknowledgement of what was lost and an insistence that it remain lost, that the door stay closed, that the passage stay blocked, that the memories stay buried behind stone that shows no sign of ever having been anything but solid and final. The light is fading now, the sun dropping behind the western hills, the shadows lengthening across the chapel floor. Soon it will be night, and the stars will appear through the open roof, and the door will stand in darkness, patient and silent, waiting for nothing, leading nowhere, holding its secret with the permanence of wood and stone and erasure. Perhaps it was never meant to be opened again. Perhaps the monks understood something we do not, saw something in the memories they catalogued that convinced them the door between past and present, between what is remembered and what is forgotten, between the living and the dead should remain closed, should be sealed with stone and silence, and the absolute finality of a passage that no longer passes. We step back from the door, leaving it to its vigil. The abbey breathes around us, settling into the night, and somewhere in the darkness, in the space between memory and forgetting, the truths that were deemed too dangerous to preserve continue their existence, sealed behind stone. 10. The path that circles the same stone. In the hills above a forgotten valley, there is a path worn deep into rock by centuries of footsteps. The hills themselves are ancient, their slopes covered in coarse grass that whispers in the wind, their summits bare, stone-weathered smooth by millennia of rain and sun, and the patient erosion of time. From a distance, they appear empty. No trees break their profile, no buildings mar their contours, nothing suggests human presence or purpose. They are simply hills, rising and falling in gentle waves, forming a boundary between the inhabited lowlands and the wilderness beyond. But if you climb high enough, if you know where to look, you will find the path. It does not lead anywhere. It circles a single standing stone, round and round, a spiral carved into the earth itself. The path is perhaps 2 feet wide, worn into the bedrock to a depth of several inches, its surface polished to the smoothness of river stones. It forms a perfect circle around the stone at its center, or nearly perfect. There are slight variations in the radius, Small deviations that suggest the path was not measured and laid out but was created organically, by feet following feet, by the accumulated passage of bodies moving in the same direction for so long that the rock itself yielded and the earth remembered. Who walked this path and why? There are no villages nearby, no ruins, no indication of what purpose the stone might have served. The closest settlement is miles away down in the valley, and its inhabitants have no memory of the path, no stories about it, no tradition that would explain its existence. They know the hills exist. They see them every day, dark shapes on the horizon. But they do not go there, have no reason to go there. And when asked about the path and the stone, they shake their heads and speak of other things. The stone itself is plain, uncarved, roughly the height of a man, and it leans slightly as though listening. It is not remarkable in any obvious way. It is not tall like a standing stone at Karnak or Stonehenge. It is not inscribed like the stones at Newgrange, or carved like the Mai of Easter Island. It is simply a stone, dark grey, speckled with lichen, its surface rough with the natural texture of granite or basalt, its shape irregular, as though it were placed here rather than raised, found rather than fashioned. But it leans, just slightly, just enough to be noticeable if you pay attention. It leans toward the east, toward the sunrise, toward the direction from which the path begins. If it can be said to begin anywhere, if a circle can have a beginning, the lean gives it a quality of attention, of orientation, as though it were waiting for something, listening for something, turned towards some distant event or presence that has not yet arrived but is expected, anticipated, prepared for. The path around it is smooth, polished by the passage of countless feet. We step onto it and feel the difference immediately. The rock beneath our feet is different from the rough stone of the hilltop around it. It is smooth or almost slippery, worn to a gloss by the friction of skin and leather, and whatever materials the walkers wore or carried. The surface has a faint sheen to it, as though it has been oiled or treated. Though we know it has not, know that what we are seeing is simply the result of time and repetition, of the same motion performed over and over until the very substance of the earth was changed. There is a stillness here that feels deliberate, curated. The wind that moves across the hilltop seems to quiet when it reaches the circle, not stop. We can still feel it, still hear it in the grass beyond the path, but soften, as though the air itself respects the space, recognizes it as different, as set apart, as belonging to some order or purpose that ordinary weather should not disturb. We walk the circuit, counting our steps. 1, 2, 3. The path is level, neither ascending nor descending, maintaining a constant elevation as it circles the stone. 4, 5, 6. Our feet find the rhythm easily, naturally, as though the path itself suggests the pace, as though the countless feet that came before have left not just their marks in stone, but their rhythm in the space, a tempo that persists even in the absence of the walkers. 7, 8, 9. The slow turn, the stone always at the center, the way the landscape shifts subtly with each revolution. As we walk, we notice how the view changes. To our left, always the stone, constant, unmoving, the fixed point around which everything else revolves. To our right, the landscape beyond the circle. The hills rising and falling, the valley below, the sky above. With each step, the perspective shifts. What was hidden behind a fold in the hills becomes visible. What was visible drops behind a ridge. The sun, if it is the right time of day, moves across our field of vision, rising or setting depending on which direction we walk. And we realize that the path is not just a circle, but a way of seeing, a method of observation, a technique for experiencing the landscape, not as a static view, but as a sequence of shifting perspectives, each one valid, each one partial, each one contributing to a whole that can never be fully grasped from any single position. Some say the path was walked by penitents, that circling the stone was a form of prayer or penance. This is the first explanation we encounter when we research the path, when we ask the few scholars who have written about it, when we dig through obscure journals and local histories looking for any mention of this place. Penitents, they say. Pilgrims seeking forgiveness or purification, who walked the circuit as many times as their sins required, who measured their contrition in footsteps and revolutions, who believed that the act of walking, of moving without arriving, of journeying without destination, had spiritual value, conferred grace, brought them closer to the divine, or at least farther from their guilt. The stone, in this interpretation, was a sacred object, a focal point for meditation, a symbol of God or the cosmos, or whatever ultimate reality the penitents were trying to approach. The circling was a prayer made physical, a petition inscribed in the body's motion, a supplication written in stone by the accumulated devotion of generations. Others believe it was a ritual, a way of binding something to this place, or perhaps releasing it. This is the darker explanation, the one whispered rather than spoken, the one that suggests the path was not about approaching the divine, but about containing the dangerous, about keeping something in or keeping something out. The circling in this version is not prayer but magic, not devotion but compulsion, a spell made of motion, a ward constructed from footsteps. Perhaps something was trapped here, bound to the stone by the circular path that created a barrier it could not cross. A prison without walls made only of the repeated passage of human feet. Or perhaps something was released here gradually, carefully, through a ritual that required the participants to walk the same circuit over and over, each revolution loosening the bonds a little more, each turn allowing a little more of whatever was contained to dissipate or depart or transform into something less dangerous. With each turn, the stone seems different, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, though we know we have not changed our distance. We have walked perhaps 10 circuits now, perhaps 15. We are beginning to lose count, beginning to lose track of the individual revolutions as they blend into one continuous motion. And we notice something strange. The stone, which should remain at a constant distance since we are walking a circle around it, seems to shift. Sometimes it appears closer, looming larger in our peripheral vision. Sometimes it recedes, becoming smaller, farther, as though the circle itself were expanding and contracting, breathing with some rhythm we cannot quite perceive. We know this is impossible. We know we are walking the same path, maintaining the same distance, that the shifts we are perceiving must be optical illusions or tricks of perspective, or simply the result of our growing disorientation. But the knowledge does not change the experience. The stone moves, or seems to move, and we cannot look directly at it to verify what we see, because the moment we turn to face it, to measure it with our eyes, the effect vanishes, and the stone is exactly where it should be, exactly the distance it has always been. The sun moves overhead, casting shadows that spiral outward. We realize we have been walking for hours. The sun, which was low in the east when we began, is now high overhead, and the shadow of the stone, which had stretched long toward the west, has contracted to a small dark pool at its base. But the shadow of the path itself, the depression worn into the rock, creates its own patterns. The light falls into it at an angle, creating a spiral of shadow that seems to extend outward from the stone, seems to reach beyond the circle, into the landscape beyond. We follow this shadow with our eyes as we walk, and it seems to pulse, to breathe, to expand and contract with a rhythm that might be our heartbeat, or might be something else, something larger, something that has no pulse, but creates the illusion of one through the interaction of light and stone and the passage of time. And we begin to lose track of how many times we have circled, whether we are moving forward or back. The counting becomes impossible. We lose the thread. We think we have walked 20 circuits, then realize we might have walked 21 or 19 or some other number entirely. We think we are moving clockwise, following the sun, but then we notice the landscape passing in a sequence that suggests we are moving counterclockwise instead, or that we have somehow reversed direction without realizing it, without deciding to, without the conscious intention that should precede such a change. Time becomes elastic, uncertain. Minutes feel like hours. Hours compress into moments. The sun should be setting by now. We have been walking so long. But it remains high. Or perhaps it has set and risen again. Or perhaps we have lost the ability to read the sky correctly, to interpret the position of the light. The stone offers no answers, only the endless invitation to walk, to turn, to return. It stands at the center, patient and silent. Its lean suggesting attention, but offering no guidance, no instruction, no indication of whether we should continue or stop, whether we have walked enough or will never walk enough, whether the path has a purpose we are fulfilling or a trap we have fallen into. We could stop, we could step off the path, break the circuit, walk away down the hill and return to the world of straight lines and destinations and journeys that end. But something keeps us moving. Not compulsion. We are free to leave. But something softer, more seductive. Curiosity, perhaps. Or the rhythm itself, which has become comfortable, familiar. The way our feet know where to fall, and our body knows how to lean into the curve, and our breath knows the pace that matches the walking. Or perhaps it is simply the recognition that the path offers something rare. A place where movement is not toward or away, but simply movement itself. Where circling is not futile but complete. Where returning is not failure, but affirmation. Where the journey and the destination are the same thing, and the walking is its own purpose. The light is changing now, growing softer, more golden, the quality that comes at the end of day, or perhaps the beginning. We have lost track entirely of whether we are approaching sunset or sunrise, whether we have been walking for hours or days, whether the stone has been here for centuries or millennia, or whether it appeared yesterday and will be gone tomorrow. All we know is the path, the stone, the rhythm of our feet on polished rock, the spiral of shadows, the slight lean of the stone as though it is listening, waiting, attending to something we cannot hear, but can feel in the quality of the stillness, in the way the air holds its breath, in the endless patient invitation to walk, to turn, to return. And so we walk. One more circuit, and then perhaps one more. The stone at the center, always at the center, and the path beneath our feet, worn smooth by countless others who came before, who circled and counted and lost count, who sought answers or absolution, or simply the peace that comes from motion without destination, from journeys that end where they begin, from the spiral that is both infinite and complete. 11. The mirror that shows tomorrow's ruins. In a manor long abandoned, there is a mirror that does not reflect the room it hangs in. The manor stands on a hill overlooking what was once a prosperous valley, its silhouette dark against the pale sky, its windows empty of glass, its roof sagging in places where the timbers have rotted through. The approach is overgrown, the gravel drive barely visible beneath grass and wildflowers, the gates hanging crooked on their hinges. This was a place of wealth once, of power and careful cultivation, where gardens were manicured and rooms were filled with music and light. Now it is a shell, inhabited only by birds and the slow creep of ivy that covers the southern wall like a shroud. But inside, in what was once the great hall, the mirror remains. It hangs on the eastern wall, positioned to catch the morning light, though no light has touched it deliberately in decades. The frame is blackened with age, ornate with carvings that might once have been gilded, but are now merely dark wood. Spirals and leaves and faces that seem to shift when you are not looking directly at them, that seem to watch you from the periphery of vision. Instead, it shows the same room in decay. Walls crumbled, ceiling fallen, vines growing through broken windows. This is what the stories tell us, what the few people who have seen the mirror report. They say it does not function as mirrors should, does not return the image of what stands before it in the present moment. Instead, it shows the future. Not a distant future, not some unimaginable tomorrow, but the inevitable future. The state that this room, this building, this place will eventually reach when the time and weather and neglect have had their way. In the mirror, the floorboards are broken, gaps between them showing the darkness of the cellar below. The walls that still stand in reality are crumbled in the reflection, reduced to half their height, their plaster peeled away to reveal the stone and timber beneath. The ceiling is gone entirely, or mostly gone, with only a few beams remaining like ribs in a picked-over carcass. And through the gaps, the sky is visible. Always overcast in the mirror's vision, always grey and heavy with rain that never quite falls. And there are vines. They grow through the windows, which are broken in the reflection even when they remain intact in reality. They climb the walls, wrap around the remaining beams, carpet the floor in green that is slowly, patiently, reclaiming what was once taken from the forest to build this place. When you stand before it, you see yourself as you are, but surrounded by the future collapse of everything you know. This is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the mirror's vision. You are not shown as you will be. Aged, decayed, reduced to bone and dust. You are shown as you are now, in the clothes you are wearing, with the face you have today, but standing in a room that has dissolved around you. Standing in ruins that have not yet happened but will happen. Standing in tomorrow's wreckage, while still inhabiting today's intact world. The mirror was commissioned by a lord who became obsessed with endings. His name has been lost, or perhaps deliberately forgotten, but we know something of him from the fragmentary records that survive. From the letters and account books and inventory lists that speak of his household and his habits. He was wealthy, certainly. The manor itself is evidence of that. even in its current state of collapse. He was educated, well-traveled, connected to the courts and intellectual circles of his time. But at some point, something changed. Perhaps it was the death of someone close to him. Perhaps it was a war that touched his lands. Perhaps it was simply the accumulation of years and the growing certainty that comes to all thinking people eventually. The recognition that nothing lasts, that everything built will fall, that all beauty is temporary and all power is borrowed. He became obsessed with endings, with the certainty that all things built will one day fall. This obsession manifested in strange ways. He stopped maintaining the estate, allowed the gardens to grow wild, dismissed servants who had been with the family for generations. He stopped commissioning portraits or buying fine objects. Instead, he commissioned the mirror. He had the mirror made by a craftsman whose name is lost, or whose name was never recorded, or whose name was part of the price. Anonymity, in exchange for the creation of something that should not exist, something that violated the natural order of mirrors and time and the merciful blindness that allows us to live in the present without being crushed by the weight of the future. We do not know how the mirror was made, what techniques were used, what materials, what rituals or formulas or pacts might have been involved. The craftsman appeared, created the mirror, and disappeared, leaving no record of his methods, no other works that might bear his signature, nothing but this single impossible object hanging on a wall in a manner that was already beginning its long decline. It is said he spent his final years standing before it, watching his estate dissolve into ruin while he still lived within it. The servants reported this. In the accounts they gave later, after the Lord was found dead in the great hall, standing before the mirror, with his eyes open, his face peaceful, his body so still they thought at first he was merely lost in contemplation. He would stand there for hours, they said, sometimes all day. He would take his meals there, standing, not eating so much as occasionally lifting food to his mouth, while his eyes remained fixed on the reflection that showed him the future of everything he had built. Did he see it as prophecy, as punishment, as meditation? We cannot know. He left no diary, no letters explaining his thoughts. Only the mirror, and the accounts of servants who watched him watching, who noticed that as the years passed and the estate fell into deeper neglect, the reflection in the mirror changed as well, became less distant, less future, more immediate, as though the present were racing to catch up with the vision, as though reality were conforming itself to what the mirror had always shown. The mirror was meant to be destroyed after his death. This was in his will, the one clear instruction he left, that the mirror should be broken, shattered into pieces so small they could never be reassembled, and the pieces scattered or buried or thrown into the sea. The servants were given this task along with a sum of money sufficient to ensure they would carry it out. But the servants could not bring themselves to break it. Perhaps they were afraid of what might happen if they did. Afraid that breaking the mirror might somehow bring about the ruin it depicted, might collapse the house around them, might turn the future vision into present reality. Or perhaps they recognized that the mirror, despite its disturbing nature, was beautiful, was valuable, was the last work of a craftsman whose name was lost, and whose technique would never be duplicated. They covered it with cloth and left it hanging, a secret passed down through whispers, generation after generation of servants, and then caretakers when there were no longer servants, and then simply local people who remembered that the manor existed and that something important hung in the great hall, something that should be preserved, even if it should not be looked at, something that demanded both protection and distance. The cloth became part of the ritual, part of the story. The mirror could not be destroyed, but it could be covered, could be kept from sight, could be rendered safe through the simple expedient of preventing people from seeing what it showed. We approach it slowly. The great hall is silent, except for the sound of our footsteps on floorboards that creak and shift beneath our weight. The air smells of dust and damp, and the particular mustiness that comes from wood that has been wet and dried and wet again too many times. Light filters through the dirty windows, creating shafts of pale illumination that do not quite reach the corners, that leave the ceiling and the upper walls in shadow. The mirror hangs where it always has, covered in cloth that might once have been velvet, but is now something else. Faded, moth-eaten, held together more by habit than by any remaining structural integrity. When the cloth is pulled away, we see the room as it will be. The reflection resolves slowly, as though emerging from fog or water. At first, there is only darkness, the black glass behind the cloth showing nothing. Then shapes begin to appear, the outline of walls, the suggestion of windows, and finally, with terrible clarity, the vision of what this room will become. Dust on broken floorboards, thick enough that our footprints would show in it if we were to walk through the reflected space. Sky visible through gaps in the roof. That same grey, heavy sky that never changes, never releases its burden of rain. The walls reduced to fragments, the windows empty of everything but vines that reach inward like searching fingers. And there, in the center of this ruin, our own reflections. We are not old in the reflection, not skeletal, not reduced. We appear exactly as we are now. Same clothes, same faces, same posture of curiosity mixed with apprehension. But we are standing in wreckage. The floor beneath our feet is broken in the reflection, though it is solid beneath us now. The wall behind us is crumbled in the reflection, though it stands intact at our backs. It is not frightening, but profoundly sad. This is the emotion that settles over us as we look. Not fear. The mirror does not threaten, does not warn of personal doom or supernatural danger. It simply shows what time will do, what entropy demands, what happens to all things built by human hands when those hands are gone, and the weather and the roots and the patient work of decay are allowed to proceed unimpeded. A reminder that beauty and decay are not opposites, but stages of the same song. The manor was beautiful once. We can see it in what remains, in the proportions of the room, in the craftsmanship of the frame that surrounds the mirror, in the care that was taken with every detail of construction and decoration. And it is beautiful still, in a different way. In the way that ruins are beautiful, in the way that things touched by time and reduced to their essential forms achieve a different kind of perfection. The mirror shows us that these two states, the intact and the ruined, the new and the old, the built and the fallen, are not separate, are not opposed, but are simply moments in a single continuous transformation. The manor is always both things. It is always the pristine vision its builders imagined, and it is always the ruin it will become, and it is always every stage in between. We exist in all of these states simultaneously. The only question is which one we can see, which moment we choose to call now, which stage of the song we believe we are listening to. The mirror offers no comfort, only truth. It does not tell us that everything will be all right, that what we build will last, that our works will survive us and carry our names into the future. It tells us the opposite, that everything falls, that all buildings become ruins, that the most we can hope for is that the ruins will be beautiful, will serve as testament not to permanence but to the courage of building in the face of certain dissolution. But there is truth in this, and truth has its own value. The mirror does not lie, it does not flatter, it does not offer false hope or comfortable delusions. It shows what will be, and in that showing it offers the possibility of accepting what cannot be changed, of finding peace not in permanence but in participation, in the knowledge that we are part of the song even if we will not hear its ending. We cover it again, leaving it to its patient waiting. The cloth falls back over the surface, hiding the vision, returning the mirror to darkness and safety and the secret keeping that has preserved it through all these years. The room returns to its current state in our perception. The walls still standing, the ceiling still intact, the floor still solid beneath our feet. But the vision remains with us. We cannot unsee what the mirror showed, cannot unknow the truth it offered. And perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the Lord who commissioned it understood that the mirror was not about the future at all, but about the present, about seeing clearly what we are building and why, about understanding that the beauty is in the building itself, not in the impossible dream that what is built will last forever. Outside, the day is fading. The light that filtered through the dirty windows is growing golden, the angle changing as the sun drops toward the western hills. Soon it will be dark, and the manor will be a silhouette again, a shadow on the hill, and the mirror will hang in its darkness, showing a vision no one sees, patient and eternal, holding tomorrow's ruins in its glass like a promise or a warning, or simply a statement of fact. And somewhere between the present room and its reflected future, between what is and what will be, the truth waits in silvered glass. That all things fall, that all beauty fades, and that this is not tragedy, but simply the way the song is written, the pattern the world follows, the inevitable movement from building to ruin that makes the building meaningful, makes the moment precious, makes the present worth inhabiting, even as it slides toward the future the mirror has already seen. 12. The chapel of the Perpetual candle. On a cliff overlooking the sea, there is a chapel no larger than a shepherd's hut, and inside it burns a candle that has never gone out. The cliff is black rock, volcanic stone that rises sharp from the waves below, its face scarred by centuries of salt spray and storm. Seabirds nest in its crevices, their calls echoing off the stone, their white shapes wheeling in the air like fragments of paper caught in an endless wind. At the top of the cliff, where the rock levels briefly before giving way to the scrubland beyond, the chapel stands. It is small, barely large enough to contain a man standing upright. The walls are made of the same dark stone as the cliff, fitted together without mortar in the old way. Each piece chosen for how it nestles against its neighbors. The roof is slate, weathered to the color of dusk, its edges softened by lichen that glows pale green in the rain. There is one door, oak planks bound with iron, and two windows, narrow slits that would have been meant for ventilation rather than light. And through the cracks in the door, through the gaps where the shutters meet, there is always light. No one knows who lights it or how it continues to burn. This is the central mystery, the question that has persisted for as long as anyone can remember. The chapel is locked, not with a modern padlock, but with an old iron mechanism, intricate and rusted, the kind that would require a key that no one possesses, or perhaps a key that was thrown into the sea when the lock was first engaged. The windows are shuttered from the inside, their wooden covers swollen tight with moisture, sealed as surely as if they had been nailed shut. There is no chimney, no way for smoke to escape, no means for air to enter in the quantities that would be needed to sustain a flame over days or weeks, let alone over the decades or centuries that the light has been burning. The chapel is locked, the windows shuttered, and yet through the cracks, the light is always visible. It is not a bright light, not the blaze of a bonfire or the steady glow of a lantern. It is softer than that, gentler. The kind of light a single candle makes, warm and golden, flickering slightly as though in response to breath or a breeze that should not exist in a sealed space. Through the cracks in the door, it appears as thin lines of gold against the dark wood. Through the gaps in the shutters, it shows as a faint luminescence, barely brighter than the phosphorescence of the sea foam below, but unmistakable, constant, never failing. Sailors use it as a landmark. Fishermen bless themselves when they pass. The chapel sits on a headland that juts into the shipping lanes, a point that vessels must navigate around on their way to the harbours to the north and south. At night, when the stars are hidden by clouds or fog, when the moon is dark or the air is too thick with mist to see more than a few yards ahead, the sailors look for the light, not the great revolving beams of the lighthouse that stands 3 miles down the coast, but this smaller light, this constant presence that marks the cliff and warns of the rocks below. They do not know why it burns. They do not question it. They simply use it, the way their fathers and grandfathers did, the way navigators have for generations, marking it on their charts with a notation that is half description, half prayer, the light that does not fail. Fishermen, when they pass beneath the cliff in their small boats, remove their caps and touch their foreheads, lips, and hearts. It is not quite the sign of the cross. It is older than that, a gesture from before the priests came, from a time when protection was sought from whatever powers might be listening, whatever forces held dominion over wind and wave, and the dark waters where fish swim and men sometimes drown. But no one enters. The door has not been opened in living memory. The oldest people in the village, those in their 80s and 90s who remember the old ways and the old stories, say that it was already locked when they were children, already forbidden, already a place that was honored by distance rather than approach. There is a fear that if it were opened, the flame would vanish and some protection would be lost. This fear is never stated directly, never articulated in clear terms, but it permeates the silence that surrounds the chapel. What protection? Protection from what? The villagers do not say. They speak instead in generalities, in the vague language of superstition and ancient covenant. It keeps the darkness at bay. It holds something in place. As long as it burns, we are safe. Safe from what? Storm, shipwreck? Some older danger that has been forgotten in its specifics, but remembered in its shape, its weight, its patient waiting just beyond the reach of the light. What is the candle protecting? Or what is it keeping at bay? These questions are two sides of the same uncertainty. Is the candle a shield, defending the village and the ships and the people who live and work here from some external threat? Or is it a ward, binding something within the chapel, preventing it from escaping, keeping it contained as long as the flame continues? The chapel was built by a hermit who claimed to have seen angels. His name, if it was ever recorded, has been lost. But the stories about him persist, passed down through generations with the kind of consistency that suggests truth, or at least a truth that has been worn smooth by repetition until it fits comfortably in the mind. He came from somewhere else. The stories agree on this. He was not born in the village, did not grow up on this coast. He arrived one day, walking the coastal path with nothing but a rough cloak and a staff, and he asked permission to build a hermitage on the cliff. The villagers agreed, perhaps curious about this stranger who sought solitude rather than community, who wanted to live at the edge of the earth with only the sea and the sky for company. He built the chapel himself, stone by stone. He lived in it, slept there on a bed of heather, ate whatever food the villagers brought him, and whatever he could gather from the scrubland, and he prayed. This is what the stories emphasize, that he prayed constantly, that his voice could sometimes be heard from the cliff path, a low murmuring that blended with the sound of the waves and the weird. And he said the light was not his own, but a gift from something beyond naming. This is the crucial detail, the one that transforms the story from a simple account of a hermit and his lamp into something more mysterious, more significant. He did not claim to have brought the light with him, did not say he had lit the candle from some other source. He said it was given to him, that he had seen angels, or beings so bright and terrible that angels was the only word he had for them. And they had left the light as a gift or a charge or a burden. When he died, the villagers buried him nearby and vowed to leave the chapel untouched. His grave is still there, a simple stone marker 50 paces from the chapel door, weathered now to near illegibility, but still recognizable as a grave, still marked with the shape of a cross that has been carved and recarved over the years by people who feel the need to maintain the marker, even if they have forgotten exactly who lies beneath it. The vow to leave the chapel untouched was made at his burial, according to the stories. The hermit had left no instructions, no last wishes recorded in writing. But the villagers understood, or believed they understood, that the chapel was not to be entered, that the light was to be left alone, that whatever covenant or contract or mystery the hermit had participated in was not theirs to interfere with. So they locked the door. Or perhaps it was already locked, and they simply agreed never to force it. They shuttered the windows from the outside, or perhaps the hermit had shuttered them from within before he died. And they chose not to open them, and they walked on away, leaving the chapel to its vigil, leaving the light to its burning. The candle has burned through storms that tore roofs from houses, through winters that froze the sea itself. The coast here is harsh. Winter storms come up from the south with winds that can lift roof tiles and snap tree limbs, with waves that crash against the cliff with force enough to send spray higher than the chapel, higher than the scrubland beyond. Houses in the village have been destroyed by these storms, rebuilt, destroyed again. The pier has been washed away and reconstructed more times than anyone can count. But the chapel stands, and the light continues. There have been winters when the sea froze in the shallows, when ice formed on the rocks below the cliff, when the spray that reached the top turned to rime on the chapel walls and made the whole structure look like something carved from crystal. There have been droughts when the grass died and the wells ran dry, and fire was forbidden in the village for fear of what might catch and spread. There have been years of plague, of war, of famine, of all the catastrophes that mark the passage of human time. And through it all, the light has burned. We stand outside, watching the faint glow through the weathered wood. Night is falling. The sky over the sea is deepening from blue to purple to black, and the first stars are appearing in the east. The wind has dropped, and the air is still, carrying only the distant sound of waves and the occasional cry of a bird settling for the night. The light is visible as thin lines of gold where the door planks meet, as a soft glow around the edges of the shutters. It does not flicker much in the stillness. Just a gentle, almost breathing rhythm, as though the flame were alive in some fundamental way, as though it possessed a quality of animation that goes beyond the simple chemical reaction of wax and wick and oxygen. And we feel the pull of the mystery, the desire to open the door, to see what burns there, to know if it is a candle or something else entirely, if it is tallow or wax or some substance that does not consume itself, if there is a wick at all or simply flame floating free in the darkness, sustained by whatever covenant the hermit made with the angels he claimed to see, to know if it is sacred or simply persistent. Is the flame holy? Is it divine? Is it evidence of miracles, of powers beyond human understanding, of a reality that includes dimensions and possibilities we have taught ourselves to dismiss? Or is it simply persistent, simply the result of some natural phenomena we have not yet explained? A seepage of gas from the rock below, a chemical reaction that continues indefinitely given the right conditions, a trick of geology and architecture that creates a flame that appears eternal, but is in fact entirely material, entirely explainable if only we had the knowledge to explain it. But we do not open the door. We stand in the darkness, watching the light, feeling the pull of curiosity and the weight of prohibition. And we choose restraint. We choose to honor the vow the villagers made, to respect the hermit's gift or burden, to acknowledge that some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries, that some truths are kept best at a distance. Perhaps this is wisdom. Perhaps it is cowardice. Perhaps it is simply the recognition that opening the door might not give us the answers we seek, might not resolve the mystery, but instead deepen it, complicate it, transform it into something we are even less equipped to understand. Some truths are kept best at a distance, honored by restraint. We think of the sailors navigating by the light, of the fishermen blessing themselves as they pass, of the generations who have lived and died under the protection, if it is protection, of the perpetual flame. We think of the hermit who built this place, who prayed here, who claimed to have seen angels, and was given a light that has outlasted his life by centuries. And we understand that the value of the light may not be in what it reveals, but in what it maintains. A connection to mystery, a reminder that the world contains more than we can explain, a small point of certainty in an uncertain cosmos. That here on this cliff, in this chapel, a candle burns, and has always burned, and will continue to burn, for as long as the covenant holds, for as long as the door remains closed wide, for as long as we choose to honor what we do not understand, rather than dissect it into understanding. The candle burns on, quiet and eternal, a small light, holding back an endless dark. We turn away from the chapel, our backs to the light, our faces toward the village and the ordinary world of homes and hearths and fires that are lit each evening and extinguished each night. Behind us, the chapel stands on its cliff, and inside it the flame continues its vigil, warming nothing, illuminating nothing, marking nothing but its own persistence, its own quiet refusal to go out. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps all we can ask for is a light that does not fail, a constancy in a world of change, a small flame that burns on regardless of storm or winter or the slow erosion of time. Asking nothing, offering only its presence, its warmth measured in photons rather than degrees, its purpose known only to itself and to whatever angels, if there were angels, left it burning in the darkness on a cliff above the sea. Us.